All right, welcome. Hi, everybody. Thanks again for joining us on day 2 of the 33rd Annual FIRST Conference. We're going to get things started right off the bat. We have 3 streams running today. I'm Tracy Way with the FIRST Events team, and will be assisting with host responsibilities on this stream today. Just a quick reminder before we get started, speaker Q&A will take place in our Conference Work Adventure platform. If you're just joining the stream and are not pre-registered, please go ahead and send us an email to events@first.org to get set up on the system. Work Adventure is where we are also hosting all of our conference networking activities as well as our conference exhibit hall. All right, let's get started. I'd like to introduce our session moderator for the next hour, Alexander Yeager. Alex is a security engineer within Google's Incident Management and Digital Forensics team and sits on the FIRST Board of Directors. Alex, over to you.
Thank you, Tracy. Hi, everyone. I will be the moderator for this session today. It is a great pleasure to introduce you to Sumant, who is the CEO of DeepArmor, and Rahul, who is also working for DeepArmor. Today, they will be talking about CVSS and how it can be used in medical devices and what they have done with that. I'm really looking forward to this talk, and now handing over to you, Sumant.
Thank you very much, Alex. Am I audible? Is it clear? Okay, perfect. All right, so hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. And it is a privilege for Rahul and I to be here on the stage. FIRST conferences have been pretty close to our heart. I've been attending FIRST conferences on and off for almost 13, 14 years now. And today we are excited to present on scoring security vulnerabilities in medical devices, talking about a rubric that was announced by the US Food and Drug Administration end of last year, specifically talking about new scoring methodologies for vulnerabilities in healthcare and medical devices. And before we get started, real quick, I'm the founder and CEO of DeepArmor. Previously worked for Intel, Palm, and Sun Microsystems in a variety of security roles. I also have with me Rahul, who is a security analyst with special focus on cloud and web application security. DeepArmor is a small boutique security consulting firm based out of Bangalore, India. We work on vulnerability assessments, SDLC, pen testing, security design consultations, and so on. All right, so let's dive right in. The agenda for today, we have roughly about 26 minutes. So we're going to be talking a lot about healthcare and medical device security. That's the fundamental topic. We do a quick intro to CVSS, quick because this is FIRST, and CVSS, well, the FIRST is the home of CVSS. So we'll talk about what CVSS is, we'll talk about some of the challenges with CVSS, and then what the FDA has done specifically for healthcare and medical devices to enable more accurate and precise and justifiable scoring for vulnerabilities. We talk about customizations, what goes into the rubric, and we also talk about how to use an online calculator. To the best of our knowledge, this is the only online calculator available at this point for this rubric for medical devices. And of course, we don't want to just make it all theory. We have at least one case study, depending on the time, maybe two, but it's quite likely that it's going to be one case study where we compare scoring a security vulnerability with the rubric and with the CVSS and how things can change. And finally, we wrap it up talking about the next steps, some of the gaps and future work for this product. Healthcare and medical devices have gone digital a lot more in the recent past, especially in the last 10 to 15 years. And what has come as part of this movement is that there have been new kinds of attacks, new kinds of vulnerabilities and exploits affecting these medical devices. So if you just look at the last 2 to 3 years, there have been many headlines similar to what you see on the screen. Most recently, less than a year ago, there were vulnerabilities discovered and reported in GE Healthcare radiological devices. There have been issues in Medtronic products. And there have been some very interesting presentations at security conferences as well, most notably on insulin pumps, on pacemaker hacks, and so on. So this is a problem that we can't afford to ignore anymore. It's no longer theoretical. It's no longer just on paper. But some of these attacks can have very severe impact, which means it's imperative that we have the right kind of platforms, we have the right kind of tools for doing not only the security assessments and secure design and evaluation, but also communicating effectively about vulnerabilities in medical devices. And when we talk about communicating about vulnerabilities, CVSS kind of is the gold standard right now. It's pretty much universal at this point. Almost every security analyst is aware of what CVSS is. The special interest group for CVSS is under the FIRST umbrella. And broadly speaking, I expect most of the audience to know what CVSS is. Otherwise, please refer to the first URL that we have shown on the screen here. Essentially, CVSS has three parts to it. One is called the base score, which is the simpler calculator that you see on the screen at the bottom. You also have the temporal and environmental score that allows you to tweak the knobs a little more to get a more accurate score depending on your environment, depending on the exploit availability, depending on the fix availability, and so on. The reason why I have marked the base score in green is that it's the most prevalent, it's the most used, it's the easiest. So that tends to be the option opted by most security teams. Currently 3.1 is the latest version. I know there are many extensions and frameworks and work going on for the future revisions of CVSS. Quite simply put, CVSS gives you a score from 0 to 10, 10 being critical, showstopper, blocker, whatever you call it, 0 being no risk, not a vulnerability, or something that is not exploitable or doesn't warrant the security response. There are certain challenges with CVSS. In fact, one of my former employers preferred not to use CVSS because it could lead to interpretation of scores in such a way that it does not reflect the actual vulnerability or the risk in the right way. But having said that, CVSS, as I said, is really universal. But with that universality comes certain problems, right? So it's designed to be one size fits all in a way. You see product manufacturers in the IoT space and the web application space, Linux kernel, network protocols, pretty much every sector where there is digitalization, use CVSS for scoring vulnerabilities, not only in software, but also in hardware and firmware and pretty much all through the stack. And the other kind of an obstacle with CVSS is subjectivity. Because the definitions can be interpreted differently, the answers can be very subjective. I may answer a certain question, let's say about scope, which is often debated, or let's say the attack complexity. What may be simple to me could be interpreted as really complicated for someone else. So this can lead to different scoring. And also the number of knobs may be limited. If you remember the screenshot, there were 8 of them, 3 of them for confidentiality, integrity, availability, and a bunch of them for attacker profile. And within each of those, there's either a none, low, or a high for most of them. So the number of options for each is still limited. And temporal and environmental sections often lead to more work, often lead to more subjectivity, and essentially they just fall through the cracks. Most security teams tend to use the base score. And this can lead to a lot of confusion and ambiguity in terms of, is it really representing the impact of the vulnerability correctly? Is it representing the risk associated with the vulnerability correctly? All risks are not secure, are not equal. So this kind of subjectivity and one size fits all can be really problematic. You score a vulnerability for your Facebook app or for Instagram or a social media application, but then you're using the same yardstick, let's say, for a pacemaker. So there are concerns about whether this kind of scoring, this kind of rating a vulnerability is getting the right kind of attention in the medical community. In the medical community, poor scoring or poor communication of information or lack of justification can have a severe impact, because we're talking about prioritization and how the engineering teams need to respond, how the executives need to respond, how the incident response team has to respond, and so on. So any kind of ambiguity can have a pretty severe impact. And also it becomes imperative that there are new parameters and new definitions that are mandatory in a way, or that it would make a lot of sense to accommodate them. For example, clinical environment conditions, patient safety, and so on. For this purpose, in order to address some of these challenges and ambiguities, the US FDA worked with MITRE over the last couple of years. And as of October 2020, they announced the Rubric for CVSS. So the Rubric is essentially a healthcare medical device specific scorecard and a template that's lathered on top of the CVSS 3.0 spec. There have been multiple internal revisions and sponsored studies, so a lot of work has gone into this. And as an outcome, we have the cybersecurity medical device development tool. The purpose of this is to generate accurate severity scores. We talked about how there could be ambiguities and shortcomings, so that's exactly what they want to address. The purpose is to score accurately and justify the scores. So as part of this, there are certain healthcare specific metrics that have been clearly defined in the specifications, and this also includes patient safety, medical device design, and clinical network environment. Again, if you want to summarize the purpose of the MDDT, it is to generate accurate severity scores. So how does it work? The FDA and MITRE effort does not reinvent the wheel. So we now have structured questions for CVSS-based core metrics. But the CI&A, the confidentiality, integrity, and availability metrics have gone through a lot of rehauling and overhauling. There have been 6 new sections specifically on healthcare related topics with respect to data as well as functionality. Some of the scoring is now interactive, unlike the traditional CVSS. Based on how you answer question A, question B may come up or question C may pop up. So new options appear based on how you answer. And there are 31 new extended metrics. Each of these start with an X. That can seem a lot, but actually they've made it simpler through these decision flow diagrams and extended vector diagrams. And what they are, if you look at one section, for example, privileges required, there are 3 new extended metrics here. So you look at the text in bold, it's XPRL, XPRZ, and XPRS. And there are certain questions that you answer. These questions are more focused as compared to what the core CVSS spec says. So these are more specific to healthcare and medical devices. And as you answer yes, no, or unknown, you get new options, and then you land at the privileges required outcome for that particular case. Similarly, there is an extended vector table. This is another representation for the rubric, where the questions are more verbose, and it also provides you the values and the element that are relevant, the extended vector element that are relevant. So you use this as the reference, and then you answer these questions, and that helps you generate the score. Before we start with the case studies, I want to talk about patient safety, because this has been customized for healthcare and medical devices. Any adverse effect on patient safety is flagged. So there's a flag where it's called PIPS, or short for potential impact to patient safety. The idea is that if a certain marker has come up for PIPS, then you may be required to do an internal safety-oriented hazard analysis and report this to the FDA as part of your post-market guidance. This is one of the activities that's commonly associated with Class 2, Class 3 medical devices. So this ties in nicely, where as part of the scoring mechanism, you're also providing that information to the FDA. The FDA also recommends that you perform these activities by consultation with a group of SMEs, including security professionals, device engineering professionals, healthcare experts, as well as IT integration and interoperability experts. So this reduces the likelihood of subjectivity. It gets more inputs from a broad range of experts in this space. All right, I'm going to hand it over to Rahul here to talk about the online calculator for the rubric and also show you how to use it. Over to you, Rahul. Let me just stop sharing. All right.
Thank you, Sumant. Just a moment, I'll share my screen.
We can see your screen. Oh, go ahead.
Okay. Hello, everyone. This is Rahul from DeepArmor. So from here, I'll walk you through the DeepArmor's online calculator, which is also called as Rubric calculator. And as you can see, these are the links where you can find the calculator. So do visit these links and check out the calculator by yourself. So before I show you the Rubric's calculator, I will show you the CVSS calculator, which you all are familiar with. And then I'll show the Rubric calculator to compare the differences. So as you can see, there are 8 different metrics under this base course sections, where each metrics have been defined to select a particular option in order to evaluate a particular security threat. So, but these options sometimes limit the options for perfectly defining a particular vulnerability. To be specific, the vulnerabilities which are affecting the medical devices. So in order to evaluate those kinds of vulnerability, we should be using Rubric's calculator. So this is how the Rubric's calculator is used, and this is the web page where you can see the Rubric's calculator. So the Rubric calculator mainly concentrates on scoring medical devices vulnerability. And as you can see under each metrics, which offers you a structured questions where we need to answer all these structured questions in order to evaluate a particular vulnerability in a better way. Sometimes what happens is the user or the analyst will not be sure about the answers to certain questions. So at that times, this Rubric calculator will take the worst case scenario and it is going to calculate the worst case vector value. And the interesting part is whenever we answer a particular question, so the Rubric's calculator is going to skip some of the questions which are not relevant to the vulnerability. So for example, for this field, if I select the option as yes, as you can see, these 2 questions have been skipped by the calculator because these 2 questions are not relevant for the previous questions. So once you answer all these questions, where we get the attack vector value in this place. So in the next part, the metrics which comes under this basic metric group, which are, these metrics are all similar to what we have previously seen in the rubrics, in the CVSS calculator. So as you can see, we can, this is the attack complexity metrics, and the privilege required metrics also has some of the structured questions here. And the user interaction and the scope metrics are also same as the CVSS calculator. So coming to the next part, the rubric calculator mainly concentrates on the confidentiality, integrity, and availability factors by mainly considering some of the healthcare aspects. As Sumant explained previously, this CA impact will be divided into 6 different sections, where each section specifies a particular healthcare aspect. So like once we answer all these specific questions under each section, so we are going to get a rubric CVSS score over here. So this was about the walkthrough of the rubric calculator. So we'll get back to the slides for the further. So now we'll see some of the case studies where we'll understand some of the vulnerabilities which are affecting the medical device, and then we'll calculate the CVSS score for the particular vulnerability using both CVSS and the Rubric calculator. So in this vulnerability, so in this case study, the vulnerability was discovered on a market product, which is classified as to be as the class 2 medical device, where this medical device can be connected to a mobile application via Bluetooth. So the vulnerability here is whenever the medical device is unpaired, it is always discovered by the other Bluetooth devices. So what happens now is it will open a door for an attacker where he can use his malware application in order to connect to that particular medical device, which will prevent the actual user to connect to the medical device, and the attacker might cause some denial of service condition for the user. So as we know the vulnerability now, so we'll calculate the CVSS score for this particular vulnerability. So for the attack vector matrix, I am going to select the option as adjacent, because the medical device which we are using in this case, it uses a BLE protocol for the communication part, where in order to exploit this particular vulnerability, it should be on the same protocol level. That means it cannot be exploited remotely. So I'm going to select the option as adjacent. And for the attack complexity, I'm going to select as high, because the attacker should perform some of the previous tasks, like you need to create a malware application. And some of the other tasks he should perform. So the attack complexity will be high here. And there is, the attacker doesn't require any privilege accounts in order to exploit this vulnerability. So I'm going to select none for this option. And also, the attacker doesn't require the user interaction in order to exploit the vulnerability. So I'm going to select none for this option as well. So for the scope field, I'm going to select the option as unchanged, because the exploited vulnerability doesn't affect any resources beyond the security scope. So that will be unchanged. And there is no loss in the confidential data. So again, this field also goes none. And again, there is no effect in the data that the device is going to be stored, that the medical device is going to be stored. So I'll select the option as none for this. For the availability field, I'm going to select the option as low, because once the exploit is done, the availability of the data which the device is stored, it will be partial. So I'm going to select the option as low for this case. So as you can see, we got the CVSS score as 3.1. So we'll do the same for this vulnerability using Rubric's calculator as well. Just a moment. Okay. So for this attack vector matrix, the first question is asking that can the attacker utilize some type of network or communication protocol to exploit this vulnerability? Since this medical device is using BLE protocol for the communication part, we are going to select yes for this option. And the next question is, it's asking does it use any OSI specific protocols like IP or like TCP or UDP? So since only BLE protocols have been used, we are selecting the option as no here. So the next question is, since the communication part with the medical device is taking place via Bluetooth, which is a wireless channel. So I'm going to select the option as yes here. So in order to exploit this particular vulnerability, the attacker should be in the range approximately 10 feet or less around the medical device. So I'm going to select the option as yes for this. So we have answered all the questions for this particular matrix, and we got the vector value as local for now. So for the next metrics which comes under a basic metric group, which are all similar to as what we have seen, what we have defined the vulnerability previously using CVSS calculator. So I'll select those default values for this calculator as well. So the privilege required will be no, and the user interaction also is no, and this is same as the CVSS calculator. So coming for the next part, since the medical device doesn't store any data that is related to PHI or PII data, and also the device, the medical device which we are using in this case doesn't store any data related to diagnosis. Also, it doesn't store any data related to the delivery of therapy. And also the device which we are using in this case doesn't store any data related to the clinical workflow. So I'm going to select all the options as none for this case. So we'll do the same for this section as well. And for this also. So we have selected the options now. In the next section, this section mainly concentrates on the functionality part of the medical device, where the attacker will block the functionality of that particular medical device. So based on this scenario, we'll answer these particular questions. So the functionality part cannot be read or exposed in this case. So we'll select none for this option. Again, the functionality of the device cannot be deleted. So we'll select none for this option. Since the attacker is going to block the functionality part of the medical device, so we are going to select the option as low for this case. Okay. In the next section as well, the medical device which we are using in this case doesn't store any sensitive data. So all the questions under this section will select the option as none. So we have answered all the questions. So as you can see here, we got the Rubric CVSS score as 4, and the severity level is medium. So let's get back to the slides, and we'll compare the results now. So this is the screenshot for the CVSS calculator, where we have selected every option under each matrix. And as you can see, we got the CVSS score as 3.1 for this case. And this is the tabular form for all the questions that we have answered using Rubric calculator. And this is a better way to analyze the answers that the user has opted. As you can see in the below screenshot, this is the comparison part for the CVSS score. Where this score is, this is the score using, we got the score using CVSS calculator, and this is the score we got using Rubric calculator. So as you can see, the severity level here deviates from low to medium, and also we can see some major deviations in the CVSS score part as well, which is from 3.1 to 4.0.
Thanks, Rahul. So I think in the interest of time, we'll just jump to the conclusion. If you can just hand over the screen back to me, please.
Okay.
Right. Cool, thanks. So we saw one case study where the CVSS score actually changed. So we were using the CVSS, the actual 3.1 calculator, we saw that the score was a low, but using the Rubric for CVSS, by answering some of those questions specifically, we saw that it jumped to a medium. And note that the attack vector and the access vector and the attack complexity has changed. This is because the attacker profile has not really changed, but by reading the Rubric and analyzing those questions that the Rubric specifically calls out for some of these sections, it was easier for us to actually lower the access complexity from a high to low, and the access vector from a local to from an adjacent to the local. Right. So what helped in this case was that there are very explicit questions in the Rubric that enabled us to answer these questions specifically and precisely, and hence arrive at a score that is more justifiable compared to the regular CVSS 3.1 calculator. Similarly, in the interest of time, we'll just breeze through this. There is another case study where the score did not change much at all. It just came down from 7.9 to a 7.8. So what we're trying to say is that don't expect this to dramatically change the results, but there could be certain specific cases where the rubric can actually provide you with a more accurate framework for scoring medical devices vulnerabilities. And lastly, while this is showing a lot of promise, there are certain gaps and more work to be done. Some of these studies have been done on very focused groups of medical devices, so it may not apply to all kinds of medical devices. And this guidance is not suitable for pre-market submissions. This is not for evaluating risks and vulnerabilities in the architecture and design. This is more for device level vulnerabilities. And essentially the feedback and data is still relatively thin. This is brand new in a way, because these kind of programs take years to mature and eventually reach that kind of stability. So I think to summarize, this is really promising. This can help the healthcare and medical environment to a large degree. And yeah, so that's what we had for today. So if you have any questions, we're going to be hanging out in the Work Adventure 2D platform. And if anyone wants to talk to us about medical device security and healthcare IoT security, happy to chat anytime.
Cool. Thank you very much, Sumant and Rahul. Pretty interesting work. Yeah, as Sumant said, Q&A is in Work Adventure, so be sure to hang out there. And with that, I think we're going to transition to the next talk.
Bye.
Bye. Tracy, do we start right now?
Yeah, go right ahead.
Okay, cool. So hey, Mitsuhara-san. My name is Alex. I'm the moderator of this session. We will be having a Q&A right after this presentation in Work Adventure. So make sure to go over there. It's our conference to the virtual social platform. And this is also the place where you find the exhibitors and other fun activities. With that, it's a great pleasure to introduce Mitsuhara-san, who works as a researcher for NTT. NTT is a long-time contributor to FIRSTStuff. Today, he will share a model to automatically evaluate risk by combining CVSS things with like acid sensitivity. So I'm really looking forward to this talk, and now handing over to you. Stage is yours.
Okay. Could you see it?
Yes, everything looks good.
Okay. Thank you for your introduction. As shown here, the title of my presentation is Simple Method of Automatic Risk Assessment for Web Systems, Considering Asset Sensitivity. To begin with, let me tell you something about myself. My name is Mitsuharu Sasaki, and I'm a member of NTT CERT, which is a CSAT organization of NTT, a Japanese telecommunications company. Up to now, I have been engaged in vulnerability assessment and management for 7 years. And in my present research, my goal is to achieve security operations that anyone can easily perform. Okay, let me begin by giving you an overview of our research. Our objective is to automate the work of risks assessment that up to now has been done manually. This work has required advanced skills and has been costly to perform. To meet this objective, we propose a simple risks assessment considering the asset sensitivity of web systems. This method automatically calculates the asset sensitivity of a web system from access logs and web content, and output a risk score without requiring advanced skills. It calculates asset sensitivity from the viewpoint of confidentiality, integrity, and availability, and combines this asset sensitivity with CVSS to output a risk score. We perform risk assessment considering asset sensitivity and examine the effectiveness of the proposal method by an experiment using web systems operated in an actual company. My presentation is organized as shown here. Background, proposal method, evaluation experiment, result and discussion, and conclusion. Okay, let me give you some background. According to the National Vulnerability Database, the number of vulnerability is increasing year by year. A total of 80,356 vulnerabilities were reported in 2020. In particular, anyone can access web systems that are open to the public on the internet, so there are many opportunities for attacks. Appropriate countermeasures to vulnerabilities must be taken. However, this huge number of publicly released vulnerabilities makes it difficult to deal with all of them. For this reason, many corporate security analysts and administrators need to quickly assess risks to prioritize vulnerability countermeasures. In general, risk can be determined from three elements: asset, vulnerability, and threat. This risk can be determined by assessing each target system from the viewpoint of what kind of system has what kind of vulnerability and what kind of threat exists. However, assessing the risk of each system is difficult for these three reasons. First, there are many systems managed by security analysts and administrators, so risk assessment takes time. Second, while a variety of guidelines for risk assessment are presented by NIST, ISO, and other organizations, they tend to be highly versatile but highly abstract at the same time. This means that analysts themselves must decide on detailed procedures, and they must possess advanced skills such as knowledge of business operations and knowledge of risks assessment. Third, today's shortage of security experts is making it extremely difficult to educate and secure personnel having such a specialized skills. As a result, risk assessment is not an easy task due to a variety of cost factors, including operational cost and cost of acquiring skilled personnel. Practically speaking, we can assess risks and prioritize vulnerability countermeasures by using a vulnerability assessment method called the Common Vulnerability Scoring System, or CVSS. This is a framework for assessing vulnerabilities. It expresses the severity of a particular vulnerability by a 10-level CVSS score. We can assess risks easily by using CVSS scores. However, in general, published CVSS-based scores do not consider assets. They are values that focus only on vulnerability and threat, which means that they cannot provide an appropriate assessment of the target system. There is a concern that countermeasures to high-risk vulnerabilities will be put off until later, and that more money than necessary will be spent on security countermeasures. Therefore, there is a need to establish an automatic risk assessment method considering asset sensitivity. Up to now, a variety of risk assessment methods have been proposed, but most of previous research has focused on vulnerabilities and threats. A few risk assessment methods that consider asset sensitivity have been proposed. For example, Axe et al. They propose a method that defines asset sensitivity as the sum of the CVSS scores of the vulnerabilities possessed by the system. However, this is a method focused on vulnerabilities. It does not sufficiently consider asset. In addition, Shakibazat et al. Proposed a method for determining asset sensitivity using system information like server function. However, in this method, analysts must manually collect and classify asset information, which requires advanced skills. In response to these problems, we propose a risk assessment method that automatically considers asset sensitivity in a web system. Here is a conceptual diagram of the proposed method. This method consists of 3 processes. The first process is data collection. This process obtains web content from the target web system. The second process is calculation of asset sensitivity. This process calculates asset sensitivity by analyzing the web content and previously prepared access logs. The third process is output of risk score. This process outputs a risk score by evaluating the given CVSS score based on CVSS environmental metrics using asset sensitivity. The proposed method assumed websites that have web content as target systems. It also considers administrators and security analysts that must manage many websites. In addition, the asset sensitivity values and risk scores calculated by the proposed method are not absolute values. They are expressed as a relative ranking among the web systems in the organization. In the following slide, I will describe in detail each process of proposed method. In data collection process, input is the FQDN of a target system. This FQDN is used to collect the web content of the target system using a web crawler. The collection process begins by searching for any links within the top page. It makes transition to each page pointed to by link and get the content of that page. Then it searches for links again within each of those pages. This process is repeated up to a specified hierarchy to collect web content. Next, I will describe the calculation of asset sensitivity. In the proposed method, we focused on the viewpoint of confidentiality, integrity, and availability. The first index is sensitivity of confidentiality, denoted by alpha. We consider that the more confidential information a system has, the greater the impact. The second index is sensitivity of integrity, denoted by beta. The more web content and function a system has, the greater the impact. Finally, the third index is sensitivity of availability, denoted by gamma. The greater the number of system users, the greater the impact. The three terms alpha, beta, and gamma corresponding to these three elements are now summed up to give asset sensitivity S. In the following slides, I will describe in detail each of three elements. First is sensitivity of confidentiality, alpha. This sensitivity is calculated based on whether a login form exists and the number of accesses. We chose the existence of a login form as a basis for this calculation because a system having confidential information should restrict access by authentication functions. In addition, we chose number of accesses as another basis for this calculation. Since the volume of confidential information tends to increase proportionally to the number of users, which means that the impact of an incident is likely to be great for a large number of users. Here, A of W sub I denotes the number of accesses to the target system W sub I, and L of W sub I denotes whether a login form exists in the content of the target system. The number of accesses is determined by counting the number of unique IP addresses from access logs. The process calculates the product A and L for each system and uses the maximum value of these products as a logarithmic base. Then it calculates the logarithm of the target system to determine the value alpha. Next is sensitivity of integrity beta. This sensitivity is calculated by determining the total number of content items, and parameters in each page. This is based on the idea that since tampering occurs by the misuse of functions on the system, the greater the number of content items and functions that can be tampered with, the greater the impact when an incident occurs. Here, B of W sub I denotes the number of content items in target system W sub I. It is calculated from the number of pages in the obtained content. In addition, C of W sub I denotes the number of parameters in target system W sub I. It is calculated by counting the parameters used by the system from input tags and form tags within a page. Similar to confidentiality calculations, the process calculates B of W sub I and C of W sub I for each target system and uses the maximum value of B of W sub I and of C of W sub I as a logarithmic basis. It calculates the logarithm of B of W sub I and of C of W sub I and sums the two logarithms to determine the value beta. Finally, we calculate sensitivity of availability gamma. This sensitivity is calculated from number of accesses. This is based on the idea that the greater the number of users, the greater impact when a system outage occurs. Here, the number of accesses is calculated from access logs obtained from the target system. As in the previous calculations, the maximum value of A of W sub I calculated for each target system is used as a logarithmic base. And the logarithm of A of W sub I for the target system is calculated to give the value gamma. Next, I'll describe the process for outputting a risk score. This process calculates risk using the environmental metrics of CVSS. These environmental metrics are defined by CVSS. They serve as metrics for assessing the vulnerability risk, including the asset of the target system. risk is expressed by this formula. Here, impact is a term related to asset, and exploitability is a term related to the vulnerability and threat. The impact term include the variables called security requirements, which based on the conditions of the target system. When the vulnerability is published, the values of terms other than these security requirements are simultaneously published. So consequently, in the proposed method, we only replace the values of these security requirements with asset sensitivity values and evaluate the CVSS score to determine the risk score. The term CR, IR, and AR respectively related to confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Each is expressed by the term corresponding to its asset sensitivity plus K. Here, K is a constant equal to 0.5, which is used to match each of those terms with the CVSS score range. I will now describe the evaluation experiment. For this evaluation, we used web systems operated by an actual company and performed an evaluation using rank correlation coefficient between system importance and asset sensitivity. Here, system importance expresses a level decided beforehand by a security analyst in the company based on internal company policies. System deemed important by the company is set to high, and a system not deemed important is set to low. The types of systems used in this experiment include the company's official website, customer service site, tech blog, product introduction site, and so on. This experiment evaluates whether a correlation exists between previously assigned system importance and asset sensitivity obtained by the proposed method. In the experiment, we evaluated a total of 18 systems collected access logs for a period of 1 month, starting from July 1st, 2020, and collected data by searching through 3 hierarchical layers. To begin with, here the result of calculating asset sensitivity for each of the 18 systems. For this category, based on system importance, it has not been possible to evaluate the difference in asset sensitivities between systems within the same category, that is high or low. However, it can be seen here that the quantitative values provided by the proposed method make it possible to rank each system. This slide showed the result of calculating asset sensitivity in detail. First, sensitivity of confidentiality alpha tended to have high scores for main website that handle customer information such as customer service site. Next, sensitivity of integrity beta tended to have high scores for large websites such as the company's official website. And finally, sensitivity of availability gamma tended to have high scores for websites with a large number of users. Next, this slide shows the rank correlation coefficient and the distribution of asset sensitivity. Using Spearman's rank correlation coefficient, we determine the correlation coefficient between system importance and asset sensitivity. We obtained a positive correlation of 0.82 for asset sensitivity S which suggests that the proposed method is a valid indicator of system importance. Also, a positive correlation was obtained for the elements alpha, beta, and gamma. The right figure shows a normalized histogram of asset sensitivity. These results show that systems of high importance can be separated from systems of low importance according to asset sensitivity, which indicates that company policies can be expressed by our asset sensitivity. Finally, as a case study, we present an example of outputting the risk score using actual vulnerabilities. Here, we present only a portion of these results concerning space limitations. We calculate risk scores using two vulnerabilities related to web servers. The first vulnerability relates to the Apache HTTP server. It affects confidentiality and integrity. CVSS base score is 6.1. The second vulnerability relates to the Microsoft IIS server. It affects only availability. CVSS base score is 7.5. We calculate risk score considering the asset sensitivity of the target system using computation formula for CVSS environmental metrics. On examining these results, we can see that system 3, having the highest asset sensitivity, obtained the highest risk score for these vulnerabilities. Furthermore, on comparing system 5 and system 6 with respect to the CV 2019-941, system 5 has higher, but the risk score, the system 6 is a higher, get higher risk score. This suggests the feasibility of risk assessment concerning the asset sensitivity of each score. Because the gamma of system 6 is higher than system 5, and so this vulnerability affected only availability. So this result reflects correct evaluation. So in the past, it is difficult to prioritize vulnerability countermeasures based on CVSS based scores without considering asset sensitivity. However, using the proposed method to evaluate risk scores would make it possible. For example, if the budget for vulnerability countermeasures is limited, countermeasures for system 3 should be given priority. Based on these results, we can say that the proposed method worked as hypothesized for the most part, and that is proved to be an effective technique. However, we found that some issues remained. First, it is difficult to calculate asset sensitivity in the system that has no login pages, but that collects and manages customer information through a contact page. Second, it is difficult to crawl through pages that make a transition by inputting appropriate parameters through web forms or APIs, which makes it difficult to calculate accurate scores. We need to make further improvement to deal with these issues. I will now conclude my presentation. We propose a simple method of risk assessment considering asset sensitivity. This method defines asset sensitivity and automatically output a risk score using access logs and web content. In this way, it is a method that can assess risk without requiring advanced skills. We confirm the effectiveness of the proposed method by conducting an evaluation experiment using web systems of an actual company. That completes my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. The Q&A will now happen in the virtual world, so make sure to check it out. And I think now we have a little break before we continue.
Yeah, great. Thanks, guys. Yeah, we're going to go into a break. Streams 2 and streams 3 are on break as well. They will resume this after, well, actually, wherever you are, they will resume at 14:30, but we will have a featured panel, life and security practitioners in the wild, excuse me, will start in this stream at 13:15. All right, we will go into break. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Okay, hi everybody. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Welcome back. We are just wrapping up the first break, and a real quick thank you. We're going to run a sponsor advertisement, one of our gold sponsors, Rapid7.
Rapid7 SaaS SIEM Insight IDR helps companies drive more efficient and effective detection and response programs, enabling teams to focus their talent on what matters most. Insight IDR simplifies SecOps to elevate outcomes by empowering analysts to be experts with its easy cloud deployment, lightweight collection technologies, and out-of-the-box detections and reports. Insight IDR also enables teams to transform their security by unlocking visibility across the entire modern IT environment, with cloud scale and agility to go wherever your organization goes. You'll also get actionable alerts and embedded expertise you can trust. Stay ahead of new threats with embedded insights and expertise from the Rapid7 threat intelligence, research, and managed services teams. And lastly, Insight IDR accelerates incident response. You'll always know what to do next thanks to clear information visibility and embedded automation. To learn more, visit rapid7.com/info/FIRSTCON21.
Fantastic. Great. We'd like to thank Rapid7, and I think we're going to get started. If you're just joining us right now, welcome to day 2 of the 33rd Annual FIRST Conference. I'm Tracy Way with the FIRST Events team, and will be assisting with the host responsibilities on this stream today. Real quick, speaker Q&A will take place after this session in our conference work adventure platform. If you're just joining the stream and are not pre-registered already, please go ahead and send us an email to events@first.org and we'll get you set up on the system. Work adventure is also where we are hosting all of our conference networking activities as well as our conference exhibit hall. All right, let's get started. I'd like to introduce our panel moderator, Sean Richardson. Sean is a senior manager with NVIDIA's Product Security Incident Response team and sits on the FIRST Board of Directors. Sean, over to you.
Great. Thank you, Tracy. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, wherever you may be. I am very excited to get to host this panel. I have some old and new friends here, so very excited to get caught up. A lot of folks are looking at security. How do people get into security? And those of us who've been in it, how do we stay in it so long? I think a lot of us have been firefighting for a while, and the twists and turns can certainly be challenging sometimes. So today we have a great panel to talk to. Carolyn Wong, Jeffrey Carpenter, Katie Masuris, and Nazira Collage, excuse me, have been in the industry and come at it from many different angles. We have folks representing all kinds of different businesses and vendors and backgrounds. And I don't want to take up too much time because I just kind of want to jump in and get started this morning, folks, especially for those of us who it's a little early. One of the things is, let's just go through and get the first question over. It's like, how did you get into the industry? What got you started? Carolyn, can we start with you, please?
Sure. So just first, actually want to say thank you so much, Sean and Tracy, and I'm just super excited to be here. How did I get started? So when I was 16 or 17 years old, my father, who's a Chinese immigrant, asked me, what would you like to study in college? And I said, I would like to study dance because I love dance, or I would like to study psychology because I think that's very interesting. And he's a Chinese immigrant to the United States. So he said, you're going to study engineering and you're going to attend the best school you get accepted to. And so what happened was I studied electrical engineering and computer science at UC Berkeley. When I was a junior in college, I thought, oh, now it's time to look for a summer internship. I applied to 50 or so companies around where my boyfriend at the time's family was based because I wanted to stay with his family instead of my family that summer. And I ended up getting an internship at eBay. I graduated from school and I said, oh, you know, I have enjoyed this so much. I would really like to work here full time. And they said, well, IT has a hiring freeze, so we don't have a position for you, but there's an entry-level position in information security. There's actually a couple. And at the time, this was 2005, I said, I don't know what information security means. And they said, that's okay. You know, they were looking for a new college grad, and the rest, the last 16 years are now history.
Though that you made it sound so easy. Nazira, how about you? Where did you come from? Where was your background from?
You know, I think it's kind of going to be similar. So I grew up in Central Asia, for those who don't know. That's where I went to college. So when I was graduating high school, I wanted to do something with math because I loved math. And so basically I had two choices, economics or computer science. And I was like, let's go computer science. And that's how I ended up so I finished my bachelor's in computer science. And then after that, I had a great opportunity to do my master's in India. And so I spent 3 years in India doing my master's. I didn't take any security related courses. I mean, they didn't offer any. In my undergrad, my grad, nothing. And after I finished my master's, I had opportunity to intern with World Bank. And the group that I was interning ended up being in security and enterprise security. And that's how I ended up in security. So it was purely, you know, it wasn't intentional. It just happened to be my first internship in security. And that's how I started in security. And just like how the rest is history.
Wonderful, wonderful. Katie, how did you get started?
Well, first of all, again, thank you so much for having me on this panel. And you and the fellow panelists are among my favorite people in this industry. So it was a pleasure to get up this early. Let me just say that. So how did I get started in security? Well, before there was an industry, I was hacking things. So in the late 80s, when I was a teenager, I was on a local bulletin board system in, near Boston, where I grew up. And it was some of the same members of the Loft hacking group were were on that same BBS, as well as the Cult of the Dead Cow and some of the earliest hacking groups. So I grew up hacking, and there wasn't really a career in it back then. So when I went to college, I studied molecular biology and mathematics. And then I decided that I didn't want to work in molecular biology and mathematics, but I was still good at computers. So, I made a few transitionary hops, first doing systems administration at the Genome Center at MIT, where I was working, and then moved into systems administration again at the Department of Aeronautics and Astronautics at MIT. And we were getting attacked left and right. So there was my opportunity to dust off the old hacking skills, but instead hack myself before someone else could. And then I became a professional penetration tester just at the very beginning of when that industry was starting, again, with some of my old childhood friends, former Loft members who had started a consultancy called At Stake. And I think it was, At Stake was acquired by Symantec, and Symantec sent me off along with a lot of other At Stakers to eBay, where I actually met Caroline and members of her team in the early days of eBay security. I remember finding some very weird vulnerabilities, which I hope still don't exist, but they're not paying me anymore to check, so it's fine. But long winding journey, and I would say that anybody in our industry who's been around for a while has probably had an unusual path or a non-traditional path. So I want to encourage people out there to definitely, take leaps of faith, especially in yourself.
I think that's a great point, Katie. It's everyone I've met, no one has had the typical, I studied computer science for 4 years, 20 years ago, because you're right, it didn't exist. Jeffrey, how did you get involved? How did you come here?
Well, thanks for having me on this panel. It's an honor to be here with my colleagues. Well, I actually haven't told this story very, very often. My first entry to computer security was in high school. We had a multi-user PDP-11, I'm dating myself, system, and I modified, I'm not going to use the word hacked, I modified a system program so that if you run it and enter a certain keystroke, it allowed you to change yourself to any user on the system, and I got busted for doing it. So that was my first. So I then, from that point on, redirected my efforts to more honorable, the honorable side. And my first job was in enterprise IT at the University of Pittsburgh, and that gave me a fantastic background of how do you build scalable, secure services to serve 50,000 users. And at the time, the physics department was starting to get broken into very frequently, and they'd be broken into, we'd have to go help them recover. And I tried to get the leadership of the computer center to realize we got to create a response team, we have to make this more formalized, we have to help these departments, and they really weren't interested. And I was very fortunate, based on location, that the CERT Coordination Center at Carnegie Mellon was right across the street, and they were hiring, and I was hired as a entry-level incident response analyst at the CERT Coordination Center, and ended up staying with CERT for 20 years. So that's how I got started.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing. I love it when it's stories we haven't heard before. That's always it's like, ooh, get in the dirt. So lots of experience here on this panel, folks who've been doing this and coming at it from different angles. So, coming at it from comms, coming at it from penetration testing. I myself am a former veterinary technician. Again, it all comes down to getting the foot in the door. What do you all consider what's something important as a security professional? If you were kind of advising somebody who's getting in, how would you direct them? Jeffrey, let's start with you, please.
Well, I think it's really important not to only focus on the technical skills. A lot of times in our industry, people think the technical skills are the most important thing, and they focus on that, but that's not necessarily the most important thing. It certainly is important, but it's one of many things. So you really need to ensure that in your career, and when you're preparing yourself for your career, that that communication is extremely important. Your ability to present, both the written and oral communication are very important. Collaboration skills, investigation, just basic investigation skills, intellectual curiosity. So there's a lot more than just the technical skills that people tend to focus on and think are the most important. I was never the most technical person in any security room that I've been in, and that's not what has helped me be successful. It's been bringing people together, helping them collaborate, help them reach decisions and reach understandings together. And so it's important to focus in other areas, not just technical.
Excellent. Does anyone else have something they'd like to add?
I think that something that's happened to me 1 million times throughout my career is that I encounter something that I don't know or that I've never done before. And I would say to any of us in the industry or starting out in the industry, don't be afraid of that. That is going to happen. Just be curious and just have a learning mindset. So number one, focus on learning. The other thing is that I've had a variety of like really positive and really not so positive experiences throughout my career. And I want to actually quote an online yoga teacher I follow, Yoga with Adrian. She says, find what feels good. And I think that not everyone is good at everything. And not every context is right for every person. So if you find yourself in a situation where you're like, oh, this doesn't feel very good, then maybe that's an opportunity to focus on what does feel good. If you're interacting with someone and you're like, wow, this is a really positive, enriching, encouraging experience. You know, I'm really connecting with this person. Like, that's a person to spend more time with. You know, and if you encounter someone and they're putting you down or they're not treating you well, that's a person to like try not to spend time with. So I would say, number one, focus on learning. Number two, like Adrian from Yoga with Adrian says, you know, find what feels good.
I love it. Katie, it look like you had something more to add?
You know, I couldn't have said it better in terms of keeping that open and learning mindset. Honestly, the field is so new and so relatively green. And as we're seeing from all these ransomware attacks, definitely not a solved problem, you know, in terms of getting everybody to the level of cybersecurity that we need, you know, everyone to be at. So I think that preserving that, you know, open mind and curiosity, and then understanding that, you know, taking your experiences from one place, there's always another place that needs to know what you have to offer, right? So manage your, you know, sort of manage your career path, try and learn new things, but also take those career opportunities where you might be able to, you know, be in charge of an organization at your next job where, you know, and apply the things that you learned not being in charge and being a team member, you know, at your previous job. That's something that is also, you know, in terms of just general career advice. We live in an era where it's normal to change jobs every couple of years or so. And, you know, when I was kind of coming up career-wise, that was certainly frowned upon. You know, I spent my first 4 years of my career working at one place because, you know, I thought you tried to get a job and stay there for life and kind of progress up the ladder. But career-wise, you know, especially in cybersecurity, don't let that mindset limit you, especially when there are new areas to learn and new organizations that might need to learn what you specifically have amassed in terms of your knowledge.
That's great advice. Nazira, do you have anything else to add?
I mean, same thing. I think just to reiterate about, there are so many roles in security, right? So if you start somewhere and you don't like it, try something else. I mean, there's so many things, and you need to find something that's you're passionate about, right? So that makes you, you know, happy. You know, look at the day as like, oh, I'm gonna go solve all these problems, right? And I think security provides you that opportunities. There's so many roles, and don't feel discouraged if you go take your first security job and you hate it. You know, there must be something else for you. Yeah.
Excellent, excellent. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we have a lot of experience on this panel. So let's kind of move on to the questions about how we have survived so long doing the kinds of jobs we do. One of the questions I have is, you know, what would you do differently? Is there something you would change, something that you would try and do better, something that you maybe would have let go of sooner in your career now that you're kind of looking back at it? Carolyn, please.
I guess if looking back, I mean, there was a period of time in my career where, even though people around told me like, oh, you need to go, you should go to leadership management track, I resisted that for a while. I was like, no, I like being technical. I want to be IC. So I think, obviously you need to do what feels right. And, but I think for me, it took probably a little longer to make that decision, even though I don't regret that decision, right? I definitely love what I do. But I guess my advice is listen, so yeah, for me, I think that decision took a little longer. Maybe it was for a reason. I wanted to be completely sure, but that was one thing, if I go back, it's like, maybe, I should have talked to more mentors sooner, get, external input sooner. I think it's just took me a little longer.
Okay, great. Carolyn.
So I've worked for super big companies and I've worked for super small companies. And earlier in my career, I had decided specifically to work for more established companies. I really believed there was value to being more specialized in the context of an organization that already had relatively a lot of processes in place. I have loved working for a small company. And it's just because the impact of me as one individual and what I can accomplish at a small company is so different than what's possible at a larger company. And therefore, I also learn so much. I get to know so much more about what my colleagues are doing and how what I do impacts what they do. And so that would be something that I would maybe change. I would maybe have begun to explore opportunities at smaller companies, much smaller companies, earlier in my career, because I've really just enjoyed that so much.
Excellent, excellent. Jeffrey, how about you?
Well, I'm very fortunate that I don't regret any of the career choices that I've made. I've been blessed to work for some really good organizations, and I've learned a lot. I think the area that I to this day I have to keep working is I'm an introvert, and so it's hard for me to walk up and just start talking to people. And you really have to do that to build relationships with people, especially people especially build relationships with other people and other companies doing jobs, because eventually someday you may be able to connect with them in some way that's going to help you in your career. So I have to get out of my comfort zone, and I know in this industry there's a lot of people that are also introverts, and you have to force yourself to do what is uncomfortable, because it will eventually pay benefits to you.
That's a very good point. Katie.
Yeah, that's a great point, Jeffrey, about being an introvert. So I'm an introvert who plays an extrovert on the internet, and the fact that I think regret-wise in my career, one, I would have changed jobs more often. We already talked about that a little bit, but if you don't do that in your career, sometimes you will find yourself, you will eventually find yourself working for people who have less experience than you. And that's just the reality. And maybe it's true in other areas as well, but I've been in cybersecurity for over 20 years, and that's certainly been my experience. And then I would have started public speaking a lot sooner. Now, granted, at the time, there were really not a lot of conferences that welcomed newcomers at all. Now you have a plethora of different conference opportunities. You can do a B-sides. They even have special, speaker coaches and mentors and things like that to help you get going. But I never gave a talk until I think it was 2006. And it was really because I didn't believe that there was anything I could talk about that hadn't been done before, or if I wasn't dropping 0 day during my talk, with the circles that I was moving in, that nobody would be interested in what I had to say. So I would say, for sure now, if you're just getting started, go give a talk. I mean, who cares? Talk about, your first year in InfoSec or breaking into the industry of information security. Those would be fascinating talks, and guaranteed lots of people would be interested in what you have to say.
Excellent. What would you say has been have you had any twists in your career? Has there been something you were on a path, maybe it was working a big incident, or maybe it was, working for a specific company, and just that left turn came out of nowhere? Does anyone have a story around that? Just kind of that quick change of going into something and going, wow, here we go.
So I made a transition from being what I refer to as a practitioner, meaning like on a security team with the job of, protecting and defending that organization. And then I switched over to the vendor side. And those are really different roles. And when I had originally been on kind of security teams and leading security teams, I thought that was sort of the type of role that I was always interested in. I find that being on the vendor side gives me easier wins, if that makes any sense. I feel like being on the practitioner side, it's sort of like all of the problems all of the time. And that is incredibly valuable. There's such an awesome opportunity for learning. At the same time, there's also like thousands of security vendors trying to like buy you dinner and like be your best friend. And so there can also be, especially if you're sort of in a budget owning management type of position, there can also be this like weird vibe. And I thought I wanted those things, but I will say, like, on the vendor side, there are these business goals that can be achieved. And when those business goals get achieved or even exceeded, it feels super good. So I think that for me, I kind of earlier in my career thought I would always be leading security teams. And it turns out I actually love being on the vendor side and specializing and focusing on one particular problem, rather than being in a situation where my job is to manage all of the problems all the time.
Awesome. Jeffrey, I think you had a little more to add.
Yeah, well, I took a leap when I left CERT and moved from incident response to product security, working for Royal Philips, doing product security for medical devices. So that was back when that was just becoming a bigger issue. And that was great experience for me. It was completely different than what I had been doing at CERT. But I realized several things while I was there. One, I missed managing people because that was not a people leader role. And it was unlikely, based on the people that were already in positions there, that I was going to get to a people leader role soon. And I realized I missed incident response. So I was only there for 3 years and then moved to SecureWorks. But that helped me figure out what I really wanted, because after 20 years at CERT, it kind of like clouded my mind as to what I really wanted to do in the future. And that really, it was a great experience, but it helped me realize that wasn't the experience that I really wanted. And it helped me move to a role that was more fulfilling for me.
Excellent. Thank you, Jeffrey. Katie, any twists in your career?
So twisted.
We've got a few minutes, if you depending on how
to elaborate on that. I would say that it certainly, my 7 years at Microsoft were, one, the duration of time that I spent at Microsoft was a surprise even to me, right? I had been a Linux developer at the turn of the millennium, and the fact that I joined Microsoft at all felt odd to me. But they were expanding roles, and I was shifting and trying to decide what I wanted to do next, because after a while, breaking into computers, while fun, it gets repetitive, it gets boring. And especially when you're seeing the same classes of vulnerabilities over and over again. So I would say maybe the biggest twist and surprise in my career is that we haven't solved basic, injection flaw problems, right? Whole classes of vulnerabilities that I thought for sure, surely an ancient hacker such as myself cannot still break into things. But I mean, I hacked Clubhouse recently, that new audio app. I was just like, all right, then, I guess the more things change, the more VC will back whatever, and I think the twists and turns in my career have just been absorbing the way that things are evolving while still staying so fundamentally basic that it is such a breadth of the haves and have-nots. And Wendy Nather uses the term security poverty line. And I would say I use the term security 1%, because it's only the largest organizations that have the money and resources and vision and have been forced, by harsh reality to truly invest in security and have these specialized roles. You actually don't see a lot of security specialized roles downstream in the ecosystem of vendors. I think, Sean, you and I didn't overlap at Microsoft at the same time, but the exact grind that I'm talking about in terms of, the security response team. But I think it was 2007, Popular Science called Microsoft Security Grunt one of the top 10 worst jobs in science. And it was between elephant vasectomist and whale feces researcher. And it was not a lie. And we got t-shirts. So, I mean, maybe this is a convoluted and twisted answer to your question, but I would just say the entirety of my career has been full of surprises. And I expect it will continue to be so.
I believe I still have that t-shirt, and having been a volunteer at a Marine lab and having dealt in whale feces, I will say the incident response job was definitely some days a little worse. Nazira, how about you? Any twists?
Nothing really big twist. I mean, I think going back to what Katie said earlier, I mean, I spent 10 years at EMC and Dell / right? So that was a long, and so when I made that switch, it wasn't easy for me. It was like, let go 10 years, you build a team, you build a program, everybody knows you in leaving all that and starting kind of new. It was scary. But I think it was necessary for me to learn new things, and it was, personal decisions as well. So, but I guess it's just, don't be afraid to make big changes. Obviously, get the input, get the information you need to make those, decisions, but just don't be scared. Sometimes you have to make big decisions.
And sometimes jumping out of those, like Carolyn was mentioning earlier, those uncomfortable, bad areas and jumping into something new is scary, but also very rewarding. Yeah.
I mean, in my case, it wasn't bad, right? I had a great career, right? It was me leaving a great team, great career and starting fresh. And that was a big decision for me, but I think sometimes you have to make those decisions to keep learning. And
now, what would make you kind of go from doing something that's good and you're enjoying and all to trying something completely new and kind of scary?
For me, it was both, personal decision, commute. When COVID wasn't there, my commute was going to be like really, and I have, I had kid going to kindergarten, so it was, a lot of it was a personal decision as well. But from the professional one, it's just I was an incident response as well for a very, very long time. And my new role wasn't going to be an incident response. I mean, yes, we're going to support, we support incident response, but it wasn't me making, calls at night, making decisions on incidents. It was like, it's going to be completely different. And I was also moving from on-prem, as you know, EMC and Dell, it's like we're selling hardware and software, going to full cloud. So those were the things for me. It was a learning opportunity for me to learn a completely different things.
Awesome. Thank you. We've seen a lot, and Katie mentioned earlier all of the different ransomwares that are going on, and we've had a few more incidents, industry-wide incidents, I think just in the last couple of months, half a year, than I'd seen in a while. And I know we've been seeing numbers of incidents going up and up and up. What can practitioners and companies do better? Whether it's championing new talent, trying to fix, the path they're on. I mean, Katie, you had mentioned earlier the 1%, how most companies, unless they're very large and have had incidents in the past aren't really even scaled to deal with the kinds of incidents we're facing right now. So what should we be doing better? What should we be looking at?
Well, I can start, honestly, no matter how small your company is, multi-factor authenticate all the things. Just please multi-factor authenticate all the things, and you will be in a lot better shape. And certainly some of the ransomware attacks that we've seen, multi-factor authentication probably would have made the attackers move on to the next target. And then the only other thing that I would say is that as your organization grows, attempt to grow your security capabilities in step with, proportionately to the risks that not just your company is facing, but that your users, if you are a producer of technology, are facing. So that was my one beef with Clubhouse, was that they had millions of users. And at the time that I contacted them to report the security vulnerabilities that I found, they had fewer employees than I did total. And, they were already at the $4 billion, rumors of acquisition by Twitter, $4 billion mark. So that's a disproportionate growth of your security capabilities, if I ever saw one. And I think that our industry, unfortunately, is incentivized towards, building the features, scaling, getting the users, getting the data before, organizations have had a chance to take a serious look at their security. So trying to stay in proportion with your risk and your problem set will help a lot of small companies. And hopefully they don't get so big that they are surprised by a middle-aged hacker who happened to find some stuff, along with my cat, who is here, by the way, and threatening this very panel that we are on. He may make an appearance.
We may get hacked. Oh, goodness. Okay. Anyone else? Things participants doing.
Yeah,
Jeffrey.
if I can just add, and I agree with Katie. I mean, most companies are making still some of the most basic errors, so it's not like they need, the most cutting edge thing. They don't have the basics down. I think the other thing that I would add is this is where I think communication and collaboration are very important as practitioners, making sure that your business partners, others in the business, understand what some of the choices that they make, what the risks actually are, and helping communicate that upward become very important. And if you cannot effectively communicate and you can't collaborate with others, or you take a very, brusque attitude towards people that you think don't get it, you're not really going to advance your organization, and maybe even not advance your career if you don't. So I think those are very important factors in helping move a company forward.
Awesome. Carolyn.
I totally agree with Katie and Jeffrey. I think that it is really important to focus on the basics. It is really important to try and get the investment that's appropriate. One of the ways that I recommend that folks try to get the resources that's appropriate for an organization. 15 years ago, a security incident in the news was like a very big deal. And I would say like today, it's still a very big deal, but it's also increasingly common and we are kind of used to it. There's an opportunity for us as security practitioners to leverage recent incidents to explain to people who are not security practitioners how this could happen at our place. Maybe not like this exact same thing, but sort of an underlying theme and how that applies. And I think that, to Jeffrey's point about communication and collaboration, I continue to see security people wanting so much to speak the language of the business and just having a tough time with it. And to those folks, I would say, learn everything you can about how your organization works to achieve its goals, and also sort of leverage current incidents and what happened so that you can tell stories that are interesting and relevant about what may be going on in your organization.
Zara.
Yeah, I just want to add on. I think a lot of us, I think, sometimes forget to bring our end customers and user along to our journey, right? Because a lot of things, especially in the software industry, we make a lot of things available, but if they're not used by our end customers and users, they're useless, right? So sometimes we forget about that, and so we need to bring them along. So be it making things easier for them to use, or just basic education, like I'm sure you guys agree, like so many incidents, things related with because customers didn't use the certain things that was already available for them to use. So I mean, I've been in so many. So I think sometimes we forget that. So we need to always, and also we need to hear from them, right? We need to hear like why they're not using some of the security features we're making them available. Is it hard for them? Like what other things? So I think we need to bring that feedback from our end users and customers, and sometimes we forget as a security practitioner because we are so focused internally.
I think too, also like you were mentioning, bringing the external and the internal folks along for the ride. I think the biggest thing I got to do was taking my head of comms out for a beer one night and just explaining kind of how things can go sideways in the media. And it was very helpful to get them on board with things that need to change. Let's move a little bit more to roles. So you all have had certainly different roles and different parts in your career. How are you seeing roles evolving? Are you seeing the industry going in a certain direction with security roles? Are you seeing places that are, being left behind that we're missing, or seeing maybe too much attention in one area versus another? How are you all seeing that? Katie?
Well, I see a lot of attention on the hacking side of things, and myself as a hacker, I thought, wow, this is paradise, or I would have thought that this is what present me, middle-aged hacker me would have thought about it. But in fact, it's an unbalanced equation. People are obsessed with 0 days and obsessed with hacking, and they're not really understanding that knowing about a flaw is less than half the battle. There are so many other security jobs that are so important, and they're on the defense side or on the offense in order to help train the defense side. And so I think that's one major thing, major theme that I see people kind of focusing the wrong kinds of security attention when they do finally start paying attention to security. Not to beat up on Clubhouse, but maybe a little bit to beat up on the VC model of growth first. They didn't have a security team, which is understandable when they had under 10 employees at the time, but they had a bug bounty, and that seemed like a crazy place to be investing your early security dollars. I mean, absolutely insane. So, I think that the other major thing that our industry is shifting towards, not just this, sort of been an ongoing theme of being obsessed with hacking, right? But something else is that there are hardly any entry-level security positions. And I think that's a huge mistake. When Caroline was talking about the fact that there were entry-level security positions at a major tech company, that it was like, oh yeah, those were rare even back then, because what little security dollars you have, it makes sense from an organizational perspective. They're trying to get the most experienced, biggest bang for their buck candidate they can. But what they're missing is opportunities to train people who are there, not in a security role already, but want to move into security. So they're missing a huge opportunity of their existing personnel. And they're also missing, opportunities to recruit and train some folks who are in entry level, would be appropriate for entry level security jobs. I think that's a major pipeline problem. And I heard at some point, there's something like 3.1 unfilled cybersecurity jobs in the entire world. Around 500,000 of them are in the United States alone. And I was hearing that over 1 million candidates tend to be competing for the same 10,000 or so entry-level security jobs. So what do we need to do differently in our industry? Have more entry-level jobs and do a lot more lateral cross-training from within organizations to not just educate everybody more about security, but actually to pull from the business, and they know their area of the business very well, and pull them into security.
think that's a great point, Katie. And I know one of the things I've heard in the past is, well, I'm going to train them up and then they're going to go leave and make more money at another company. What do you say to that?
Let them leave. If you can't.
Yes, good. That's
right?
good.
Yeah, if you can't compel them with enough benefits and reasons to stay and career opportunities, then they should go, and you should namaste them right out the door, you know?
Jeffrey?
No, I completely agree. Training is extremely important for us. It's one of the sacrosanct things that doesn't get touched. You have to help people learn and grow. This industry is changing too fast. If you don't, and you leave the people, they're not only disgruntled, but then they're not able to do the job anymore because everything's changed around them and they haven't learned. I also completely agree with Katie about entry level. There was a really good article in the Australia Financial Review about a week ago talking about how businesses are starting to turn towards non-traditional backgrounds to bring them into security. Psychology was one of the things they were talking about, bringing people with psychology skills and then training them on other things. We have to in this industry. We have to do that. The only other thing that I would note is things are a lot more collaborative today than they were when I started in security many years ago. You have to be a team player. These things are so complicated when you get into these situations. No one person's going to be able to solve these things alone. So you have to have the people with skills. When I'm interviewing people, collaboration and ability to communicate with them, that's the most important thing I look for when I'm interviewing for people, because the days of having a single person go in the closet, slide pieces under the door and then they come out with the answer, those are long gone.
Awesome. Carolyn?
I think that our industry has a challenge when it comes to writing job descriptions. I think we are not so good at that. And I think it's super hard both for the hiring manager and for the candidate. There is an opportunity here, I think. I do think that some hiring managers have a tendency to rely on HR teams and recruiters to help them. And I think that trying to fill a security role is pretty different from trying to fill a lot of other different roles for a lot of different reasons. And there's all these mismatches, and I do think that if we as an industry could get better at writing job descriptions, like figuring out actually what it is that we need and want, and then writing it down clearly, then that would help. I think that's very difficult. And I think it's super difficult both on their hiring manager side as well as the candidate side. I mean, it is absurd that on one hand, we've got like 3 million unfilled jobs and however many million people who really want these jobs, and we can't do the matching. So that, I think, is an unsolved opportunity.
I think you had a great point there too about, involving HR. And do you see that maybe that HR, they're more generalist and maybe not as used to dealing with the security personality that we sometimes see in the industry? Or
so I had another super unexpected twist in my role a couple of years ago, which is to say, I now have 16 years of experience in information security, and I'm also the head of people at my company right now, which means I oversee people operations and talent acquisition. And I think it's actually a data problem. And what I mean by that is if you're like a recruiter or a people ops person, there's like data that you can get about roles and locations and levels. And that data for security is sort of all over the place. And so what happens a lot is that security roles get categorized incorrectly. And then you're actually looking for a person at such and such level, but the way that your compensation band is structured, it's at such and such other level. And there's a severe lack of data. So I think that that's really where folks struggle. That, and I think that hiring managers, a hiring manager in security is not only hiring a team for security. They're also managing their team, trying to keep everyone emotionally afloat, doing their job, putting out fires, trying to train, trying to strategize, trying to ask for money. And so the recruiting and the focus on that ends up being maybe like 5% of a person's job. And I actually have come to learn that for a hiring manager, if you're going to do a very good job at recruiting, it takes at least 25% of a person's job, I think. And so there's kind of not enough time, and it's difficult to prioritize the time that it takes, I think, to do well, which is where you get sort of like these copy paste job descriptions that don't actually match what you're looking for, where you get sort of a lack of justifying an appropriate level for what you're actually looking for, or you're maybe don't have the space and the time to brainstorm like, oh, instead of this like one senior role, could I sort of like break it up into 2 or 3 more junior roles and have folks, specialize, all of those things take time. And one of the things that security hiring managers don't have a lot of is time.
Carol, I want to share one tip for the hiring manager, if you don't mind, that worked for me, and it will save you a lot of time. Spend 30 minutes to do live sourcing with a recruiter once, right? Once you have a job description, spend 30 minutes, do live sourcing, and it helped tremendously. Then you don't have to waste your time reviewing hundreds and hundreds of resumes that do not match what you want. So invest that time upfront, do live sourcing, and it will help you a lot. So that's one tip that has been helping me.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you. We've talked about kind of how everybody got into their careers and the twists and the roles. What keeps y'all up at night? Like we've mentioned, there's still nothing seems to have been solved. We're still doing a lot of the same things, if not at the larger levels, all the newer and smaller companies coming up. What kind of makes you fear a little bit?
Okay, besides the obvious answer of Scappy the cat keeps me up at night, which is absolutely true. I would say, honestly, national security has been on my mind for a very long time. And the fact that our incident responders, especially at the federal level, are under-resourced. They are understaffed. They lack the people, process, and tech to do their jobs effectively. That really concerns me. And, I gave testimony before Congress a couple weeks ago on software supply chain security. And the fact that the recent executive order in the United States covers cybersecurity to such great extent is wonderful on the one hand, but it's also, kind of like, it's almost like turning to the federal government and the private sector and saying, have you considered being more secure? Because this is what, this is what you should do, is be more secure now. And it's, to me, it just feels like there's been so little consistent investment across administrations, across the private industry, that ransomware is just one very loud symptom of a problem that we on this panel have known has just been simmering this entire time, So what keeps me up at night? It's that we've reached the boiling point, and it's, there's no better time to get into cybersecurity if one is considering a career in it, because there are, it's like precincts without fire stations. There's absolutely a lot of work to do. So that plus the cat, really, they keep me up at night.
Can't help you with the cat, but Carolyn.
From my perspective, and it's maybe not sort of only an InfoSec thing, but when I think about my young children, I have 2 kids below the age of 10, and I think about like their lives and what the big challenge of their lives is. I feel like when I was growing up, there was like an agreed upon set of facts that people believed. And I think that's not the case today. I think disinformation is rampant. And I think that is just the super fascinating phenomenon, and I think that as security professionals, integrity of information has always been of utmost importance to us. And I think we have an opportunity but I certainly don't know how to go about solving it, which is why it keeps me up at night. That to me is absolutely terrifying.
Yipes. Jeffrey, what keeps you up at night?
Well, I'll pick something different than what my other colleagues have said, and I think privacy issues. I think, and the need for people to better understand them. And I think as professionals, we really need to help people that are not technologists understand why privacy issues are important to them. I mean, when we talk about, you can combine this with getting people interested in the field, but go to schools, go to as a professional in this industry, and speak to them about these kinds of issues. And it kind of will touch back on something that Katie talked about before, not speaking early enough in her career. Everyone in this industry, no matter what level you are, you're at the level where you can go into a school and talk to students about the work you do, about the pressing issues of the day, and they will ask you. They're smart. They will ask you very intelligent questions and very challenging questions. But I think it's our duty to go and help educate those folks.
Excellent, excellent. So we've talked about the nightmares, including the cats. Where do you see hope for the future? Where do you see things getting better?
I think, I'm sorry, go ahead, Katie.
No, I was going to say that, I have a couple of kids as well, and all of my hope is wrapped up in them and their generation, and not just what they will do, but hopefully what they won't do with technology. Quite frankly, we are building things faster than we can secure them. We've always done this, but at this point, it is exceeding, even our ability to keep up with the needs and of all of these threats. So my hope for the future is that we will grow a little wiser, with our building of technology. Just because we can doesn't mean we should necessarily build it, and that we'll start having better and more knowledgeable lawmakers and regulators who can help shape the industry without holding it back and without chilling security research, for example, in their willingness to regulate these systems. So anyway, I think that there are more technologists like me and others who are willing to help with that regulatory process, and hopefully shape an industry that we can all live with, whether or not, regardless of how fast computers get and how close we are to true AI and all of that. I am hopeful.
Awesome. Jeffrey?
I was going to say the same thing Katie said. It's really it's the youth of today, and as those who have grown up with a much higher level of technology than any of us had when we grew up, as they get older, the average understanding of technology is going to increase. You have lawmakers that are 80 years old. The biggest technology when they grew up was a telephone that was a party line in their house. So, as the youth get older, they will have a much better understanding. And I think the more that we do to help them not just understand the technology, but understand the societal issues that technology poses, the better we will be in the future.
Excellent. Carolyn?
I think that education is going to be different for my young children than it was for me. My husband and I went through traditional American education, which really just means a lot of student loans. And I think for my kids, there were so many amazing things that came out of the pandemic, and a lot of them had to do with technology. My 6-year-old is proficient on Zoom. She's more proficient than I am on Zoom. I literally look over her shoulder and I'm like, oh my gosh, you can do that. She's like, yeah, duh, mom. And she's learning to code. I wish I learned to code the way that she's learning to code because it's actually fun. You can take, in today's world, which I think you couldn't 20 years ago, the very best, most engaging, most interesting teacher. And that teacher can teach everyone about a topic in the entire world who has internet. Now, only half the world has internet. It's easy to think because of the situation we're in that everyone has internet. Not everyone has internet. That is a separate problem. But I do think that education is going to change for the better. I think that there's going to be more focus on things that people want to learn and things that people need to learn. And I think that people are going to have more and more access to learning if they choose it.
Excellent. Is there any hopes, any bright lights that you see?
Yeah, just to add what Carolyn said, I mean, COVID's changed a lot of things, right? I mean, COVID drove a lot of innovation, which is sometimes scary, especially the areas that I support. There's like, wow. And so, but I think it's hopefully it's going to also drive the accessibility, right? That people have more access to things that they didn't have. I think, the security talent pool is going to be wider. And, we don't have these restrictions of, oh, you have to be in the Bay Area, you have to be in the, Boston to apply for this job. So I think we're going to have much more larger talent pool being more open about remote work. So those are the things that excites me. And yeah, the youth. I mean, my 70-year-old, she's awesome on Zoom, right? And I was like, oh, where's this button? But yeah, I'm just excited to see things through her eyes. And yeah, I'm hopeful for the younger generation. I mean, I've seen this with all the stuff happening around us, how high school students and middle school students here in the area are speaking up, and how they're showing their empathy much more than a lot of adults in most cases. So I'm really, really helpful about the youth that, they will make the changes that we all need.
Excellent. We've got 2 minutes left. I had one last question, see if we can sneak it in. We've gone through careers and twists and the hope for the future. What is the one bit of advice you would give your younger self at this point? That you, as you were starting your career, what would you say to yourself?
I would say that like all sorts of stuff is going to happen that you can't predict and that you won't expect, and some of it will be amazing and some of it will be not amazing. And I would say that like to trust yourself, to know that whatever happens, you will be there on the other side to catch yourself, to know that you are so capable that no matter what comes up, you can handle it. That would have been so nice to know as a younger person.
Don't be afraid to say, I don't know, and ask for help. No one can know everything. And I think people sometimes, think people will think that they're weak if they do that. And that's not the case. If I see people say, I don't know, that's actually a positive.
I think a couple things. One, I would have told my younger self to start a company. The fact that I waited until I was in my 40s to start a company made me realize I should have started a company in my 20s. So start a company. And then, when I wasn't being paid enough and I wasn't being promoted and I wasn't being recognized, I wish I had told myself in more emphatic terms to take that job and shove it, So that's the advice I would give my younger self. Start a company a lot sooner. And if you're not in a position to do so, then make sure that you are your loyalty should be to yourself, not to any particular job or team or whatnot. Career-wise, your loyalty really has to be to yourself, and you will build great things wherever you are, and anyone is lucky to have you. So I wish my younger self had heard those words.
To me, I guess one thing I would say, don't be afraid of taking on new challenges, right? There will be people, there will be a team who will support you. You're never going to be alone. Sometimes you feel like, oh my gosh, how am I going to do it by myself? But you're never alone. So you always have somebody who's going to champion you, who's going to help you. So don't be afraid of taking bigger things.
Excellent. And with that, I'm going to close out our panel. I want to thank you all so much. This has been an honor to talk with you all today. And thank you for those who got up a little earlier than usual. Carolyn, Jeffrey, Katie, Nazira, thank you again for joining us here at First. And we really appreciate your participation. And to all of you who joined us live to watch this, thank you for joining us. And we will be right back in just a few moments. Oh, and we will be, the Q&A will be in the work adventure. I believe it will be Q&A 2.
Stream 1.
1. All right. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. That was awesome.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Hey, everybody who is online right now. We're going to go into another quick break. Go grab whatever meal of the day it is for you, or coffee or water or beer, and we will get started at the 30 marker. All right, welcome back, everybody. We're going to get started here in another couple of minutes, but we're going to go ahead and run another quick gold sponsor ad. And we're going to say thanks to SecureWorks for once again sponsoring the first conference.
Yeah, I used to ruin the curve in high school. But now, I'm ruining hackers' evil plans. See, I'm the one in that room most are too afraid to go in, fending off cyber threats day and night, because I use SecureWorks Taegis. So I'm here, working to keep our data safe, keep our emails from becoming virus portals, and making sure our clients' information doesn't get hacked to pieces and sold on the dark web. And I'm not going anywhere.
All right, thanks again to SecureWorks. I'd like to go ahead and get started. If you're just joining us back here today, it is day 2 of the 33rd Annual FIRST Conference, once again presented virtually, hopefully maybe the last time. But just before we get started, I'm Tracy from the FIRST Events team. We will have a speaker Q&A. It will take place in our conference work adventure platform. If you're just joining the stream and are not pre-registered, please send an email to events@first.org and we'll get you set up on the system. Work adventure is where we are hosting all of our conference networking activities as well as our conference exhibit hall. All right, let's get started. I'd like to introduce our panel moderator, or I'm sorry, our session moderator for the next hour, Senior Cyber Threat and Intrusion Analyst at LayCert, Heinrich Adrian. Rick, over to you.
Thank you very much, Chrissy. Well, okay, hello everyone. This is Heinrich Adrian from the first team member like LayCert, and I will be moderating this session and the next sessions today. We are now in the second half of the FIRSTCON 2021 day 2 in the session 1 breakout 1 stream. Just one thing before we get started, as per Tracy has just said, that we will be holding Q&A immediately following this presentation in the Work Adventure platform. It's the 2D virtual cool social platforms, which is the same place where you can find our exhibitors and the other fun activities like Q&A, networking hall, and CTF events. You're going to like it. You can join these events after logging into the Work Adventure with the registration credentials provided to you and send by the email after you completed the registration, or as per advice, send the email to the events at first.org for the quick registration for it. So the next session is, allow me to introduce the talk of the breaking the chain of trust. So this technical talk describes the threats in the secure boot process on computer environments with the concept of the breaking the chain of trust by skipping cryptographic signature checks in their implementation of the roots of trust. So this talk is important to us since there has been a grub or boot hole vulnerability disclosed by Eclipse in the 2020. So let's welcome the speakers, Mr. Alex Bazaniuk, the firmware expert from the Intel Corporations. I hope he's here right now.
Yeah,
okay, good, cool. And Mr. J.C. Michael from the Eclipse, also the vulnerability research on exploits inside processors, especially for the hardware design, right? Are you here right now too? Okay, good, cool. And Mr. Mike Isketov from the Eclipse, also the vulnerability research in BIOS firmware implementations. So, and with that, let's get started. Alex, JC, and Mikey, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, everyone. Very glad to present here in FIRST. So today, let me share my slides very quickly. Can you tell me that you see my slides?
Yes, we can see your slides.
So yeah, today we will talk about the hardware and the firmware vulnerabilities and how this affects the entire trust of the device, and what we can do to run incident response and forensic on the devices. It's not super technical talk, but it will be some technical details. Some of the slides will be overview. You can check other sources from Mickey and Jesse and myself about the more deeper research we provide over the years. about some exploitation techniques and different presentation in our past conferences of the different aspects of that. And in the end, or close to the end, we will discuss a specific vulnerability and specific components in the boot flow, and what is the implication to have a vulnerabilities and that component, how that could be used by the attacker to compromise the entire integrity of the device and infect device as the legacy rootkits was infecting in MBR and VBR previously. Just 30 seconds. I'm CTO and co-founder of Eclipsium, and previously was researchers with Mickey and Jesse. We did a lot of research in a different area again, just referencing our back Twitter and GitHub and other links about us. So when we're talking about the devices, usually people believe that this is monolithic, trusted blocks, and has the best security practice possibly have. As well as we have in the software world, like all of this DevOps, the most kind of advanced techniques, CFI, and all of this kind of stuff. But in reality, the hardware is not monolithic. Like typical laptop or server contains many components designed and implemented from the different OEM on a different time slot, and they was basically integrated all together to have a final device. And it's very complicated, and many of that components has the software running on that components, call it firmware. For example, network card has its own firmware, UEFI, it's a separate firmware, system firmware, then it could be Intel ME firmware, it could be Wi-Fi card firmware, and so on. And all of this complexity create the big attack surface, which is researchers and attackers both looking in to find interesting weaknesses and vulnerabilities. And they go in from all of that components and looking very deeply from the different perspective and servers and laptops. And when we're talking about even appliances, in most appliances, it's just an neither ARM or MAPES or x86 box, which has the same complexity as the server, and may have a remote interfaces like BMC, or may have a remote interfaces like web interfaces, things like that. And it's all kind of has its own update processes and their own kind of supply chain and security practices, which has a lot of weaknesses. And you can see on the screen, I will not go one by one, but when you see the red boxes, it basically was exploited in the wild. And then you can see like USB was exploited in the wild, UEFI, BMC was exploited in the wild, Intel MEIMT was exploited in the wild by Platinum Group, and then the rest components, even if they was not exploited in the wild, there was a significant risk which was introduced from Rowhammer to Roca to Spectre Meltdown, which is basically breaking security of entire device. And then when we're talking about each component and the system overall in general, there is two things which is need to take care for sure is basically secure update and secure boot. Secure update is meaning that we can update that component from very securely with cryptography signature when it could not be spoofed in the middle by the attacker. Secure boot meaning that the software we running on a late stage will be verified by the software from running early stage. So then we know that if you have some secret or some kind of very trusted initialization phase, the rest of the phases would be verified. And this very trusted initialization phases in the recent 5 years got huge traction on the hardware root of trust. Is basically all of the different technology which is implementing this first phase, which will run verification of the next phase, which will be responsible to the verification on the rest of the system. And there's a lot of development happened from the multiple vendors, from vendors like desktop vendors and laptop vendors like HP, to the cloud providers like Nitra, Amazon Nitra, and then Titan and Open Titan for the Google Cloud. So there's a lot of good activities happens on the first initialization phase. And then if we will jump from the theory to a little bit more practical aspects on the real attacks, then was a lot of attacks in the wild targeting boot sequence in order to inject code at different point on the time. Sometimes it could be during the operation system, but in many cases it will go before the operation system in order to disable certain controls in the operation system level, in order to take a more persistency or more stealth functionality or more disruption capabilities like petty and non-petty attacks, which was targeting MBR. So we basically see that attackers is not looking only from the poor post-exfection phases, post-infection phases when they basically could exfiltrate secrets and things like that, but they're looking also how to stay longer, how to be undetected, how to take full control and make system unbootable. And this is all where the firmware is playing a big role. And in this firmware space, the bootloaders also play a very significant role because they're sitting right before the operation system, but after firmware. So it's basically intermediate between firmware and the classical operation system software, which was very juicy for the attackers. There's a links to check offline. And then as the response to this previous attack on the bootloaders, the classical MBR VBR type of bootloaders, secure boot technology was invented and was highly pushed. We will talk today really about UEFI secure boot. There could be a different implementation, and there could be different type of rules how to implement secure boot. We specifically focus today on the UEFI, but there's more references could be found on the other implementation as well. So the way how the secure boot works is basically has certain keys, and at some point it starts verifying binaries in order to make sure that all of the binaries has the checked by signature. So then we can basically trust this binary, and binary wouldn't be running if it's not verified. And then UEFI secure boot create like hierarchical keys or hierarchical kind of databases when you can store what kind of binaries is allowed and what kind of binaries is prohibited. And when you have basically a master key which will verify, it's called a platform key, which will verify key exchange key, which will verify DB and DBX databases. In a way, in the UEFI secure boot, we have all of these keys stored in the same storage as the system firmware. It's called SPI storage. So if someone compromised that SPI storage, they can manipulate all of this data, referring our previous work we've done to show this kind of attacks. So when all of this key working great and the firmware has fully configured correctly, no vulnerabilities in any of the implementation pieces on early stage, all of the control move into the bootloaders, and bootloaders basically need to enable and Windows and Linux boot flow. In that case, there is, in case of Windows, it would be a Microsoft signed bootloaders, which will call then late stage of the Microsoft OS to run late stage boot. And then in case of Linux, then there is something which is called shim, which is basically signed by Microsoft, small binary which should transition execution to grub. So it basically, all job for shim is basically find and verify necessary grub. And shim is signed by Microsoft, but grub could be signed by the Linux distros. So this is how the way Linux enable all of that boot flow on the boxes with the Microsoft Secure Boot and UEFI Secure Boot practices, and how they release the sign-in keys and all of that. So all of this kind of looks good. And basically what happens is here, and then you will check the signature of the from the DBX Microsoft CA signed binary, which would be shim, and then you will move to the grub. The interesting piece here is that when we have a allowed database, meaning that all of the binaries from allowed database could run in. So if someone replaces one legitimate shim with another legitimate shim, it still will run. If someone replaces one legitimate grub with another legitimate grub, it will run. So it doesn't really have a very kind of tie flow that that this binary should only be running on this platform with that binary. So it's all exchangeable, and that is also would be a source of the weaknesses as well when we will move in a second on the problems which could be done on this specific flow. So then another picture to see how the trust is implemented. So you may have hardware to trust here, or you may have signed update here. You may have full secure boot enabled with verification of Dixie components, UEFI applications, bootloaders. Bootloaders is just one of the type of the UEFI application. And overall, UEFI environment is very very extensible and very complex and juicy for the attacker, as well as very good for developers to build different use cases. There is like a full Wi-Fi stack could be running on UEFI environment. Full Bluetooth stack could be running on UEFI environment. TCP/IP, IPv6, IPsec, and many other interesting application could be implemented during early stage on the boot before even operation system run. But coming back to our scenarios, so this scenario is basically, if you see a lot of green here, that green meaning that things should be all great together. So if something breaks here, it will break entire trust on the device, and after that, nothing could be trusted. And then at each point on the time, the before break happens, you kind of can trust what happened before, but after it happens, nothing trusted. And that's basically saying that it has a single point of failure. So if there would be one weakness is found here, then we have implications for the entire integrity on the box. So the rootkits or bootkits could use it to inject itself during the boot chain. Just a couple of references on the hardware root of trust. Amazing work done by HP SureStart and Google Titan chip and Apple T2. Interesting that they all have a very specific implementation, very vendor-specific implementation, which is very hard to verify and understand how does it work. So you basically need to trust it. So when we're talking about hardware root of trust, maybe OpenTitan has much more to understand how does it work. But like if you're talking about Apple T2 and HP SureStart and even Intel BootGuard, a lot of assumption need to be done by trusting certain manufacturer and certain architecture with certain decision they make on the device to have a full trust on that device when we're talking about supply chain until the operation phase. So the previous work in this area was very significant and important and demonstrate a lot of weaknesses on the boot chain, which would allow attacker to manipulate the platform and inject the components during the early boot phases. Very interesting was research. Golden key, Kaspersky bootloader is basically legitimate bootloader, which is not maintaining signature verification after that. So the attacker could just bring it, launch it, and then run any unsigned code after that. And there was a lot of work related of how can you trust early stages before bootloader, like SPI content, SPI protection, runtime protection of the SMM, different components, different other components protection, and how they can be impacted early stage DMA attacks and things like that. A lot of interesting work was done there. When we're talking about kind of what kind of risks we possibly can find and exist on this boot chain, there could be couple categories. One category could be misconfiguration, and that's a big one. So someone believed that some register should be locked or certain characteristics should be done in one way, but it was not maintained well until the operation phase, and certain configuration was not setting up, and the attacker could use it to basically disable or inject code inside the system. And it could be implementation issues. So it could be just a buffer overflow type of issue. And that's all present in the firmware because most of the firmware wrote in C, and they basically acceptable to this type of buffer overflow type of vulnerability in almost any phase. And then we see that this vulnerability could be in signed bootloaders. And as I mentioned previously, bootloaders is interchangeable, so that gives a lot of flexibility for the attacker. And it could be also, as I mentioned, misconfiguration, but special type of misconfiguration, like unsigned component. So if you really kind of try to build this signature verification process, you must to be worried about every single pointer and every single instruction. If you run in any single instruction, or if you're not getting integrity of any single pointer, then it would allow the attacker to find that and basically manipulate that. There was some vulnerabilities showing from the bypassing different hardware root of trust, Intel bootguard bypasses from the different companies, different research group, and we demonstrate how to bypass HP Sure Start with the DMA attacks, and there was other vulnerabilities shown in a different area of hardware root of trust as well. So demonstrating that in every single step you may have an issues. And then number of vulnerability going over years is just some statistical representation on the problem. So when we're talking about like specifically bootloaders, one of the previous work was done that that legacy Ubuntu grab was signed, but didn't check the signature of the latest stage, which was also could be used by the attacker to basically install the rootkit. Yeah, let me move on. Other type of weaknesses in architecture, which is very related to what I was explaining with interchangeable binaries. So then someone can just bring a vulnerable binary, a vulnerable bootloader to the system in order to replace a legitimate one, and that would be signed, and then exploit that vulnerable bootloader in order to inject the attacker's code. And the architecture is fully flexible for that. So if you're talking about like having a way to manipulate, would be the one of the first thing which the attacker will look. And in many cases, evil-made attacks is outside of the scope for many threat models. I didn't talk a lot about threat modeling, but it's another big area on they are basically then OEMs and others build a threat model with certain wrong assumptions, but evil-made is outside of the scope for many of them, and evil-made could be easily injecting the code in the Linux boot flow. And overall, UEFI partition, which is basically a storage where the UEFI bootloader will be stored, is unencrypted. So whoever has physical access to the box can manipulate it. Even if you have full disk encryption, that part will not be encrypted. So now that was a very good overview of the different aspects, which is referencing to many different theoretical and practical works. So now it's a little bit about boot hole. And so in last year, we start looking for the bootloader and look for what the weaknesses bootloader may have, because they are very crucial piece on the boot flow. And we was looking specifically on the grab and how grab is handling the grab config file, which is in basic default configuration is not signed and can be manipulated by the attacker. And what we found that that the grab has the vulnerability how they handle the grab config file, and the attacker could use it to inject code to the system. That's exactly where the boot hole was. Just a couple details here. It was basically bug between code generated from Flex and the grab macro's definition, how it basically done. When you see this macro here, then you will see that your fatal error is just continue going and doesn't interrupt any processes, which is basically was not what is expected by the Flex generated code. And this basically misunderstanding between different kind of integration blocks during the implementation caused this mistake. And it takes years to find this vulnerability, because by code auditing, no static analysis tools will detect that. But in another hand, there was not enough significant effort on the dynamic analysis and fuzzing to the grab until we basically arrived to that area. When we chatted with the maintainers on the grab, we found a lot of interesting details about priorities and how much security attention was pointing to the grab. And yeah, it is a little bit logical bug and staying between components and integration. Maybe you can call it a little bit on supply chain risks, but it still could be found dynamically if there would be enough resources allocated to the fuzzer of grabs. So, and then when you have the overflow, you will control Felix structure, which will basically will go to the strict copy when you will control destination address, which is very classical overflow issue when you can control where you will write and what value you will write, which is basically called write primitive. And in case of the grab, which doesn't have ISLR and DEP, any of the exploit prevention technology, it basically 100% exploitable flow. So you can basically exploit this and inject code in the grab during the boot chain by manipulating the config file. Moving on, interestingly part that you can say, yeah, but we could monitor config file. Yes, you can, but you need to do it with the certain assumption, because someone can basically hook the way how you would read the file system and will return you the fake config file, because grep is running before the operation system. So operation system at that point is not trusted. So from the forensic perspective, you need to do much more work to make sure that you're really reading the file which was not hooked and not faked. So when we found this vulnerability in grep, then we open up an interesting box of all sorts of vulnerability in grep, because apparently there was not enough attention to the grep and no one taking care of the grep overall. So all sorts of different vulnerabilities, and even more found after that based on our initial kind of push on that direction, and all of this kind of vulnerabilities in different aspects was found. The more resources was allocated by community. Thanks everyone who was taking care of that. I know that's a lot of work there. And even more. Then other was very important aspects there, and I'm almost finishing on the main presentation, is architecture. If you remember, that interchangeable piece is was very flexible, but it has also the downside. So if you're thinking about each grep was vulnerable, then meaning that each shim which is triggering grep also part of the vulnerable chain. So you need to start reworking all of this process. And reworking grep is very complicated because it's thousands of them. So the decision was made that that will be reworked all of the shims, and then they will be basically update all shims in order to basically launch non-vulnerable updated greps. But even number of shims was very significant. There was about, I think, 200 plus different shims which would need to be revoked. But if you remember when I was mentioned that DB and DBX database stored in SPI storage is very limited. It could be 16 megabytes and NVRAM could be 1 megabyte, and then DBX size could be up to I don't know, maybe 650 entries. So you can only revoke 650 binaries. And if you will, one vulnerability will revoke, they will use 200 entries, then basically 3 of this iteration will fully exhaust all of your storage for the DBX, which would mean that after that, secure boot will start unfunctional, because there will be always binary which will not be revoked, which will be vulnerable, could be used by the attacker to basically inject code into. So that's why the industry created something which is called SBOT. SBOT is basically slicing on a level when you don't need to revoke the entire generation of shim. You basically need to increase the counter, and basically it's sort of a kind of generation slicing when you can basically use less space to revoke all of that generation on shims during the boot sequence. Very great solution to balance between the size of the NVRAM and DBX and how many revocation needed each time when this type of the vulnerability disclosed. This vulnerability affect all of that boxes which is have UEFI secure boot. It could be normal boxes, it could be network compliances, it could be all sorts of different devices. So when we're talking about mitigation, it should be very precise flow to mitigate it, because if you will update DBX before you will update bootloader, system will not boot. So you will need to follow very precise mitigation steps when you first update bootloaders, and then you will verify that there's no dual boot or no special configuration there, and then you will update DBX. So mitigation is very specific there. And then it can be some of that instability issue if you're talking about deprovisioning machines, so dual boot scenario, things like that. And then having this disaster recovery plan, if this type of situation happens, would be very good practices overall. Even nowadays, we see more revocation happen. So I think about a month ago, there was another DBX update. So following what is inside the DBX update from Microsoft and other kind of sources like UEFI Forum will give you a good idea of what kind of vulnerabilities was fixed in the bootloaders. So some of the recommendation to monitor the UEFI partition and to continuously install the OS updates is like available to check offline. So one of the things when we're talking about like bootkits and rootkits is basically to look on the UEFI partition and see what the content there and understand better how the boot flow works and have a more visibility to the boot flow. And even before the operation system, even like in face on the firmware, but specifically in bootloader. And it's not hard, it's just a specially mounted UEFI partition, and the files is there is the normal PE files, so you can get a hash, you can check a signature, you can make a database, whitelist, blacklist, you can cross-correlate it to the DBX. And there's a couple nice tools which could help you to do that. It's DBX tool, one of that tools there. So that just more screenshots and a little bit more explanation on what should be monitored and how. So that's mostly it. I try to make on time. I think I have maybe 1 or 2 extra minutes, but we can use that extra minutes on the more in Q&A session.
Thank you very much, Alex, for the great technical presentations. Please get into the work adventure for the Q&A as per Mikey and JC did. For I believe there are so many questions to ask over there. And thanks a lot for all of you for listening to the talk. If you have any questions, you can find the speakers in the work adventure. It is our 2D virtual social platform in the Q&A rooms on the first floor. Please be there. And having said that, we will go to the next talk session with the title of From Remote Access Terminals to Extorting Multi-Billions Companies, the Evolutions of a Modern Ransomware Group. Okay.
Okay, switching there.
Oh, hey, Fernando, 1 second. Okay. I'm just moving around some folks. All right, Rick, you're back in the room when we have Fernando as well.
Okay. So, yep. Thank you all for listening to the talk previously. And if you have questions, please go to the work adventure. You can find the speakers over there and you can get the Q&A in the first floor. And having said that, we go to the next title of the From Remote Access Terminals to Extorting Multi-Billions Companies, the Evolution of the Modern Ransomware Group. Well, ransomware attacks are becoming more widespread, aiming entities in industry, not only IT, but OT. As cyber threat, their techniques is also advanced nowadays with anti-decryption, C2 anti-takedown, target the victims, aiming recent vulnerabilities, and also extending their threat with extortion of the data leakage. Having said that, the speaker, Mr. Fernando Mercies, will examine the details of techniques, tactics, and processes of the ransomware. In this case, Nephilim ransomware, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Yes, it is, I think, a base of the NIMT source code, and its gang's activities will be explained since around March 2020 to make us understand about their operational tactics is good for us to make us better to defend ourselves. So let's welcome the speaker, Mr. Fernando Mercies. the cybercrime investigator from the Trend Micro, who is presenting this talk based on the reverse engineering of CTI skills and using those discipline grounds for his investigations. So Fernando, the floor is also yours right now. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Rick. And well, I hope you guys can see my screen. So it's a pleasure to be here. I will, sorry, I'll just reshare it. Something happened here. Okay. Yeah, and yeah, so my plan is to talk about this group, this group, we've been calling them Water Rock. It's a very interesting piece of study on this Nephilim ransomware and everything that's behind it. So now, yes.
All right, look good.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so let's start. Let's see what this group in this ransomware campaign is about. Well, first of all, I'd like to say that we've seen a shift into this ransomware, the business model in the past few years. So basically, we could observe 3 different models. And recently, the idea actually behind these attacks is that we see more and more common things between the ransomware attacks and the APT-like or the targeted attacks of which is the usual for criminal monetization. So basically, what the message here is, it's not really like regular malware or extremely spread cybercrime. We've seen the ransomware attacks using exploits and some remote code execution exploits and lots of commonalities with more targeted attacks. And that also includes, well, previously we also saw some different models of affiliate programs. And well, I'm going to talk a little bit about, more about this specifically for this group, but this shift is important into this market, I would say, if we can call that, of ransomware. So the evolutionary path for this specific group, it's an interesting aspect. So we first start, actually they started with another ransomware, which was called JS Worm. I'm gonna mention this also. But this one in August 2019 is interesting because it's a slight shift into the operations, because this one is not a ransomware. This is from the same group, and this is called RASV-RAT. We spotted that in 2019. So basically the actor here is trying to sell his creation, and he mentions like all the features and things that the rat is capable of doing. And it starts this with this, the story starts with here. Also a little bit earlier with JS Worm, another ransomware that I'm going to talk about as well. But then there is this rat here in 2019. By the way, the ransomware, the JS Worm, we spotted that around May, also in 2019. But yeah, so the rat, well, JS Worm also published a screenshot of the capabilities of the rat. And one thing that he's very proud about is what he calls the hide VNC protocol or feature. And that's particularly interesting because, you know, when criminals actually put some names in things that we apparently we don't know, and then we have sometimes we have a hard time trying to figure out what they are talking about. But in that case, it's basically a VNC connection, so a remote connection to see the victim's user. And they started calling that HVNC protocol, which is not really anything different than VNC. It's just they've appended this hide suffix. And that's one of the interesting features of this RAT, but it's a RAT in general. The fact is that this helped this actor actually to get some reputation in underground forums when they started this, and also the JS Worm ransomware, which is the topic of this, the current screenshot. So yeah, for this, with this ransomware here, I also published, they also started advertising this in 2019. Then the reputation started to increase like more than expected, because, well, it really worked, and they had like different versions. Some of them were, people could actually decrypt, others, and then they started fixing things. But then the important thing here is the partnership and the affiliates program. You know, it's very clear that they have these affiliate programs very well designed. In that case, they say in the bottom that they work in a model where 70% of the money made, the ransom paid by the victims, stays with the affiliates, and then 30% for the developers, in that case for the group that we call Water Rock, which is the group of JS Worm actor. So this is well designed and advertised with pretty much everything that an affiliate needs to know to start to join the program and start victimizing as well. Yeah, so this program is actually, well, the NAMT, then they moved to a different ransomware. It's still in 2019, that is known as NAMT. And this is interesting because we've seen in a single year 3 different malware families by the same group. Right, and well, although this most of our studies based on Nephilim, in order to understand the Nephilim business model and its evolution, it's really important to understand the evolution of the other malware that they've developed. So yes, NAMT affiliate program started in 2019. And he also featured some, some features that JS Worm ransomware also had, and a few more, including things that they seem to be really proud about, as support for Windows XP and the file size of the final ransomware payload. We also spotted another ad from NAMT ransomware that is based on, it's very similar to the previous one, although there are more information on this. First, they say that they have only 25 seats for affiliates, and they also mentioned that they will not attack or work on CIS countries. And but this one actually is, this post was made by a different actor. So a different name, different nickname that was advertising the same thing. So we started creating our intelligence around that, and then realized that maybe the actor has 2 different names. Maybe we are talking about 2 different people working in the same group, and that's what we spotted. Another interesting stuff was when they started using, actually we spotted this in a forum, one of the actors was saying that they wanted someone that could understand about cryptors, because they had this need of crypting and making like Cobalt Strike beacons undetectable, basically. And that also helps us to understand the whole thing. Yeah, so some characteristics about this group involve like organization, the partnership management, as you could see from the previous slides, collaboration between people. Right? We have spotted at least two different actors or two different handles, and they have a limited number of seats. We also believe there is like an interviewing process when someone wants to be one of their affiliates. So that's really organized in our understanding. So yeah, moving on to Nephilim. Then they started with Nephilim, which is another campaign, and it's probably the biggest from this group, which is actually still active. Here's the victimization map that we came up with. Most of the victims, as you can see, are in North America, and based on our observations, these victims, they started victimizing US around Q3 in 2020. From Q3 2020 to Q1 2021, but I actually have victims in many different sectors and in almost all continents. So we can't say they are targeting a specific vector. They are actually targeting big companies in general. So any company, big company, can be a victim of these guys. The way in, how they do this, well, we've spotted two different vulnerabilities that they could exploit. Actually, the first one's not really a vulnerability, it's basically a brute forcing RDP. They also mentioned that, well, this was also spotted in JS Worm ransomware campaigns, but in the past, JS Worm was more, it was distributed by phishing and exploit kits and botnets and all kinds of things. But Nephilim differently is actually more selective. So Microsoft RDP, so brute forcing RDP servers for sure. We've seen this happening. And also vulnerability on Citrix NetScaler, which is actually also known as AEDP, I guess. So this vulnerability is also used by these guys to exploit as a way in. Then we come for the persistence stage of the attack. Some hacking tools or sysadmin, network admin, and things like this. This kind of tools are definitely used for some tasks during the attack. So we've seen Process Hacker be used to terminate security agents, so like antivirus, any kind of security products and things like this. Also PowerShell and PowerShell scripts, of course, to drop like the Cobalt Strike beacons, which is actually next, and other kinds of executables. But yeah, so the Cobalt Strike beacons are one of the main, one of the key components of the persistence, because it's going to talk back with, it's like a C2. It's actually called a team server in the terminology of Cobalt Strike. Well, these tools, as you may know, they are not, of course, they're not malicious per se. They are just being used with malicious purposes, and we understand it's not really easy to defend against them. And in case of the Cobalt Strike, they use different types of beacons, including DNS beacons, which I particularly find more difficult, even more difficult to defend against. Yeah, then we come to the phase of pivoting laterally. So what they do once they are inside the network, and they've have persistence already done. Yeah, so Mimikatz for sure, it's almost present in many different attacks, or almost all kinds of attack that we can that we hear of. We've also spotted them exploiting, and by the way, this is based on our observation of some incident responses that we've conducted. So what I'm presenting here to you today is really based on the real data that we've seen. So this privilege escalation vulnerability of Windows also we also spotted that being used, and a small tool called AED find just basically enumerate everything that they can using this AED find tool, which connects to the Active Directory and then start enumerating things. So this is to move laterally and then find the most interesting target, which is probably, of course, the file server or something, some computers that have interesting data, and they look at the data. It's not really automated, an automated attack. So that's why also it's very difficult. It's challenging to defend. Then we come to the exfiltrate part, where they actually steal some data. Yeah, so we've spotted them using Megasync, which is basically like an uploader tool or a synchronization tool of mega.nz, which is a file sharing service. So they have accounts there, and they use these accounts to receive data from the victims before encrypting, and that's what we call the double extortion model. And we also spotted them using FTP for this. So just uploading data to some FTP server. So this gives us actually different intelligence on IPs and accounts used with Megasync. So we could collect a lot of interesting stuff about this group. Talking about a little bit about the variants, we've seen different variants. They basically keep changing the extension. There's also a change on the programming language used. They started with C++, which is, by the way, the same language that MMT was written. And then they changed to Go. And after some time, they came back to C++, but then they started doing some other stuff. In total, by the way, these are the extensions that we've seen they using, but this is actually based on the affiliates can choose the extension. So that's not, you can just trust on the extension to do anything. This is really part of the configuration of the ransomware. So in total, we got, these are unique numbers, by the way, so 77 different payloads, and they use 22 different certificates. So the binaries are signed, and 43 different public keys, RSA public keys. This is to encrypt the generated AES keys that encrypt each file. So each file has its own AES random key that is generated, and this key is encrypted by the RSA public key. We believe that the RSA public key is based on the number of campaigns that we could be also taking as the number of campaigns started by the affiliates. So if you have a RSA public key, then that means you have a campaign. And then with 43 different ones, unique ones, that would mean 43 different campaigns. But maybe they are from the same affiliates, right? So I'm not saying that there are 43 affiliates out there. Okay, so the impact, I've talked a little bit already about this. We have the C++ and Go versions, the AES encryption used for encrypting the files. And by the way, this is after the process of exfiltrating, of stealing the data, because they are going to try to do some extortion again with the data in case the victim doesn't pay, which is very common currently, right? They have JSON-based configuration in the most recent versions, and some different operational modes. This is what I call the operation modes. Basically, With the ransom payloads, you can encrypt, the attacker, the affiliates can encrypt a single directory, probably used for, I don't know, testing purposes or a very specific type of attack. Once they are in the network, they can choose a directory and start encrypting, or they can just run the ransom payload and encrypt all drives. And as I said, this is the way the ransom is going to behave is actually configured by a JSON file. So that's really, really ready to be used by affiliates. That's a dendrogram of the current 77 samples that we have in for Nephilim, and it specifies actually how similar they are. This is using TLSH. It's a similarity. It's a locally sensitive algorithm that we've developed in Trend. So we can see that there are mainly two groups. And these two groups are actually the ones, because this is based on file structure. So the C++ compiled binaries and the Go compiled binaries would, of course, look very different. But then we can start grouping by the characteristics of the evolution. And this dendrogram helped us to understand how many variants of Nephilim ransom exist out there and how they evolved. Okay, so for the ransom, they use different contacting emails that they put in ransom notes. We've seen lots of them using like Proton Mail and Tutanota for obvious reasons of so law enforcement really can have a hard time trying to break into the security of this. But we also spotted some affiliates being probably caught and using mail.com and even iCloud. So that also gave us many interesting data about them. The CNC and the leakage blog, we've identified some actually first the team servers of Cobalt Strike that this group use. So with some high confidence, we've seen team servers in Netherlands. We can take it as a CNC of the ransomware, but in fact, it's just a team server that the Cobalt Strike beacon connects to. And in Sweden, Bulgaria, France, Romania, UK, they are all behind what we would call bulletproof hosting providers, but we've identified all these servers. And with some medium confidence, also one server in the US. This is the leakage block that they use. It's behind a fast flux network. That's the same model as Nameteam, by the way. And there's also a version behind an onion domain that we believe we've identified the IP address of this. We have more details in the paper. So yeah, on the partnerships, one interesting thing is we've seen that the NMT ransomware, not Nephilim, but NMT ransomware, because it had a C2, and this C2 was they shared infrastructure with the same infrastructure from these guys, which is a shop in dark web, I'd say. So it's a Tor, it's a .onion shop for any kind of malicious and illegal stuff. So they've shared some infrastructure for more than a year. And so there may be some connection here. Yeah, so recommendations. Again, this is, that's almost an APT level attack, I would say. So they are organized, they leak the data in a very organized way. And actually, in our paper, we described as, because we've been checking the data and if the data is online, and they are very good actually at keeping the data, the stolen data online for downloading and trying to convince the victims to pay. Yeah, so once they are in, they study the target's network. We had a case, for instance, where they've tried to deploy a Cobalt Strike beacon And it didn't work because the security agent caught that. And then they came back after several days with a signed beacon and try again. So they are persistent. It's like sometimes I was, just joking with my colleagues and say that's like a pen test. But well, the difference is that they have all the time they want, and they don't need, they don't have any scope. They can do whatever they want. So it's really challenging to defend. Well, they did not victimize any countries in the CIS, and they've been active for at least 2 years. So the model of affiliate programs make the kill chains to look different. So one kill chain of one victim can be very different from the other one, because different affiliates may use different tools. So that's also something to consider when you are defending against them. I would say that we have to be very careful when exposing things like RDP and unpatched stuff. I know that these messages have been given like all over. From time to time, everybody talks about this, but that's really important because that's literally the way they get in. And also there's hacking tools or sysadmin or network admin tools. The policies for them should be very strict, I would say. In our report, we have a full set of attribution, data, not like that we've attributed who the real people are, but there is more information about this that you may want to look at. There is also the TTPs that we've mapped using the MITRE attack framework, and a full set of IOCs, including all the RSA keys, all the certificates, and the thumbprints, the hashes, and everything else. So, and many more details on the network infrastructure of the Cobalt Strike team servers, and also the leakage blog. So yeah, with this, I conclude with a final message. This defending against ransomware is actually, I would say it's a lost battle. We are actually defending against the affiliates, which are, we can say, hacking groups. So if you are trying to defend against ransomware, it's really not the way to go. We have to defend against a hacking group, a whole hacking group that is going to use different tools to attack your network. And one of them is ransomware. But the data is stolen, so there are many other stages that you can be victimized, and that needs our attention. With this, I conclude my presentation, and I'll be around for questions in the work inventory. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fernando Mercies, for the good and thorough explanation for the threat and its relations. We will do the Q&A in the Work Adventure social platform in the first floor. Please be there. And thank you all for listening to the talk. If you have any questions, you can find speaker in the Work Adventure social platform. And in the same place, you can find our exhibitors and other activities like networking, exhibitor hall, CTF event. And also there is a special event of this open social hour where we all can virtually socialize one to another today. You can join those events after logging into the Work Adventure registrations using credential provided to you by the first secretariat and sent by the email after you complete the registration. So thank you very much for attending the event today. We will see you again tomorrow. Please check out the presentation schedule in the FIRSTCON 2021 website. There are 3 streams contents of the agenda that you can pick up. We'll see you there.
Thanks, Rick. Thanks, everybody. We'll